Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today, I sit down with a man who, through sheer faith and determination, was able to build one of the most well-known fly shops and communities in Texas. This is my conversation with Chris Johnson. Okay.
Mine are labeled, so.
Oh, well, mine aren't. Mine are the cheap kind.
Okay.
All right. Well, you ready to start?
Yeah, we can roll.
Cool. All right. Well, Mr. Chris Johnson, here today. And this is one of probably, how do I put it? I think one of the reasons I'm really excited to do this is because I recently just met you, and a lot of the people, or I met you at the fly casting event that we had in Seguin, and a lot of the people that I met are people that I didn't really think would have been as passionate as it was obvious that we all were. So I think that conversations like these are going to be really fun to have. But with that being said, I'd like for you to kind of introduce yourself and what kind of brings you here, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, certainly. So as you mentioned, Chris Johnson, I've owned Living Waters Fly Fishing since its inception. It began as a guide service in 2006, and then I opened the shop in 2008. I've been in the fly fishing industry for 20 years. So literally started working at a big box store, I believe, it was 2004. And I started working at Sportsman's Warehouse when it was here in Round Rock. And
Mm-hmm.
they had 4 stores in Texas. And so I started there as far as the industry component, but I've been fly fishing ever since I was a kid. I'm a first generation fly angler in my family. So kind of a weird story. All the fly fishing I did, I grew up here in Round Rock. So to have a fly shop in the hometown, that's a pretty special thing.
Yeah, coming full circle. Would you mind running me through the beginning of like when you were a kid and got your hands on your first fly rod through to maybe when you first entered the industry?
Certainly. So kind of a funny story. I got it all backwards, which I think is pretty normal for me, because if you've ever watched me tie flies, I actually wrap backwards. So there's also,
really?
I'm messed up in a few different ways. But the thing that's funny about it is the first time I actually was exposed to fly fishing was really through books and magazines. Because everything down south is, bass fishing and, warm water species of all shapes, sizes, and colors. And so I grew up doing all that. And my grandparents were, very avid, very outdoors. My parents, same thing. My dad, took us fishing all the time, and it was awesome. We had a really, really great time. But I started learning more about it. Fishing was everything.
Mm-hmm.
I played, it was so funny. Everybody's like, so, when you were in school, did you do sports? I played 1 year of basketball and hated it because I was just like, I am missing so many good fishing days during practice. We'd go outside. I'm like, I know exactly where they are. I know exactly what they'd eat, and I am here. Mm-hmm. And we were undefeated that season. And I was like, this is the most miserable thing I could ever do. It was the single best year of basketball you could ever play, and I hated it. And not to mention, probably wasn't very gifted at it either. But nonetheless, yeah, a baller I am not. But the thing that's funny about it is, for me growing up, that's what we did after school. That is what we did. My dad actually is a missionary, so it was one of those things that we got to travel a lot. So as a result, I've fished a lot of places, and fish places that some of them now are pretty prestigious that back then they really weren't. Nobody knew about them. And then I fished some places you'd never want to fish, and so I've done some of that too. But long and short, read about it. I had a lot of fishing books, a lot of fishing magazines. There was no YouTube, which I'm actually personally really thankful for. I just feel like when you learn it more organically through actually the printed word, a lot of times, for me, I think it was one of those things that it really made me study. And I was always a good student. So, for me, and I know not everybody is, but for me, I love nerding out about stuff. And that's something that, I check out books from the library. And I think it's funny, if you go to the Round Rock Library, which we can actually see out the window here, the new one, the old one you can't, but the new one, there's still some of those same books. And if you look in there where they had like the ink date stamps, those are my stamps.
No kidding.
Yeah, those are because they went to a digital system while I was, still a kid. And so it was funny that transition happened. Used to, they date stamp everything with, just the good old stamp. And the ones that they leave in the books, that was the last ones ever there. Those are mine. And so it's funny that that whole system changed. And so I learned about, I was just investing myself into fishing, but the fly fishing side, I started really becoming interested in it. And there was a couple of books that, were all encompassing on fishing, where it was, offshore, inshore, you had bass fishing. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of European carp stuff. And it went through like this encyclopedia, if you will, of fishing. And fly fishing was a very, very large part of that book. And I remember looking through it, seeing all the flies and the names and learning the tackle really well. And I was like, man, I'd love to learn how to tie flies. That is so cool. And I was like, I could make my own lures. I could do all this sort of stuff. And, that was kind of the draw on it. And long and short, I think I was 11 years old. My parents got me a fly tying kit. And they got it somewhere around here. I think it might have even been from Academy. They don't even carry those anymore. Academy used to have a little bit more fly fishing stuff, but nonetheless, there was a fly tying kit. And they actually have, I'm so grateful for this, they home videoed it. And I unwrapped the present. And this is back in the day of, like major camcorders with the little mini VHSs and all that sort of stuff. And we didn't have any like smartphones or anything then. And so you literally see me open the gift. I open it up and I was like, oh, a tying kit. And my dad goes, you think you could do that? I was like, no, this looks hard. And, now I'm an Umpqua signature fly designer. And so it's one of those.
Ties backwards.
Yeah, I tied backwards my whole way. I mean, when you don't have a mentor, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it literally is something that for me, these little bitty steps. And I think that's one thing that if I was to tell anybody getting into the sport, do not despise small beginnings, because it's just that place of, as something as innocent as an 11-year-old getting a fly tying kit. I mean, it turned into a career. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's something that, not everything you get as an 11-year-old kid, I mean, you're getting like Nerf guns or something, it's just something, or a BB gun to go shoot something. I mean, it's like, you're not going to make a career out of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you see passion in these kids in this upcoming generation, capitalize on it, because I think a lot of people, when they see that they're passionate about one type of fish or maybe one style of fishing or one type of fly, let them run with it. You never know where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that was really special for me, is that I started tying before I ever started actually fly fishing. My fly rod, I think I got this the following spring. I've heard so many people that started on these, but it's just the classic Martin starter combo.
No kidding.
Yeah, Martin starter combo is just a little click and pawl with a fiberglass rod. It was not good, but I mean, first time I ever took it out, I caught fish like crazy, and I was just like, this is a blast. And so I love doing it. The equipment was not great, as I mentioned, but it was a gateway drug, if you will.
Yep.
Got in it, and I continued on in it. I mean, that would have been, I went through several different rods. Oddly enough, that one broke. I don't remember how. The next one also got broke. And I went to the coast with that one a few times. I think I had an 8-weight for my second one. First one was probably just the 4 or 5-weight, whatever came in there. And then my first really great rod, what I considered really great at the time, Joe Robinson actually is the one who sold it to me. And he is, in my mind and many others, unequivocally the godfather of Central Texas fly fishing.
No kidding.
Yeah. So he passed last November, I believe it was. Oh. So we lost Joe. But the thing that was so cool about it is, at the time, Joe he had worked at the Austin Angler for years. And he, a lot of people knew him from there. He was at Whole Earth Provisions before that, I believe. There was this really cool culture that kind of happened in Austin at that time. Just the history of fly fishing in Central Texas. A lot of it just kind of was born and bred here in Austin. And a lot of people were driving out into the hill country and doing things like that. So really kind of special to see how much of a role Joe had in that. And I didn't know who Joe was. And Joe didn't care that I know who Joe was. I mean, I knew who he was. It was, I walked into a fly shop, and it was actually an Orvis factory store at the time. There was one off of 183 over there, kind of right off Mopac. And hard to get to. You had to take this weird loop around and go that way. Or there was actually an old computer store that probably got more traffic than anything in this called CompUSA, for those that are listening to this that actually remember those days. But anyway, you'd go over there by Orvis, And there was a couple other stores and stuff, but it was just in this little kind of, I won't say strip center, but it was just kind of in this little like island of stores right there in this, shopping center. And walked in, and I was shopping for flies, blowing my entire yard mowing budget. That's what, I mean, you did, you mowed a yard. That was, I saw one the other day. It was like, this was my GoFundMe, and it shows this kid mowing a yard. I'm like, yeah, you didn't ask for money. You just go made it. But the thing that was funny about it is I walk in there, I'm getting all these flies, and this gentleman comes up and says, "So what do you got there?" And it was Joe. And I'd never met him. And I was like, "Well, I've got this and this." And he goes, "I tell you what," he goes, "those are good." He goes, "But here's what I want you to throw. You're really going to do well on these." And he slips me a couple of flies, and he goes, "Tell the lady at the front, those are from Joe." He goes, "Those are on me." I was like, "Well, thank you, man." It's, you're in your young teens or whatever. That's like, that's $5 worth of flies or whatever back then. I was just like, oh my gosh, I've hit the lottery. And the thing was, that was my first exposure to any sort of true, kind of fly shop retail, if you will. And it was really neat because Joe was a person, it didn't matter where you put him. He worked in several shops. He was still Joe. And what was neat about that is he gave a kid a couple of flies, and Joe was right. That's the ones I caught all my fish on. So to be fair, he was absolutely right. And there's a couple of those flies that have been impetuses for me to design other ones in the future. But long and short, that was my first exposure to that. So I just thought, man, everybody in fly shops, they're like Joe, and that's not true. Actually, I found out over the years, and so. But I've done that. We get kids in here that they're just starry eyed to be in a fly shop. And I'm like, I tell you what, here, come here. And I'll give them a couple of flies. Cause I'm like, I know what that meant to me.
Absolutely.
And here I am, who knows how many years later, over 20 years later, still talking about that. And those are things that they matter. And I think in fly fishing retail, a lot of times it's really easy to get caught up in, just doing the stuff and missing the emotion that comes a lot with it. I mean, I have a sales rep, Eric Kramer, I think it was, that coined this one. He's the Sims and Scott and Ross and Abel and a bunch of other stuff rep. But I think he was doing some staff training for us one day up here with our whole staff. And he goes, everybody needs to remember that when somebody walks in here, it's the best part of their day.
I like that.
And I was like, that's very solid. He goes, you have to think about if they're here on lunch break, they're coming between work. If they're coming after work, they've just worked all day, and this is kind of their moment. Yeah. And he goes, just think about it. He said, you work here. He's like, so you're familiar with it. But, and I had to kind of backpedal on that and think about it. I was like, that's so true. We get so caught up in the day-to-day and just the running the thing and, event planning and all that. And we're a very event-based shop. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people and a lot of things going on. But when somebody comes in, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it. And if you're listening and I have been guilty of this, I'm sorry, but it's that place of, it gets busy. I mean, just because you have so many irons in the fire and there's so many other things I'm a part of, but I still want that person to feel valued. Yeah. And whether it's from me directly or a staff member, it doesn't matter. For me, it's just that place of, I tell our staff, I'm like, when they walk through the door, they're family. Yeah. I'm like, that's the main thing for me and do we make it 100% of the time? No, no shop does, but that is absolutely our heart and our goal. And when we don't make it, I'm quick to apologize if we know that there's been an impasse. That's something of just like, I want to make it right. I mean, those are places that, some people are just like, whatever, and that's not us. I mean, like that's not us at all. I want this place to truly be a life-giving place, not just in the realm of fly fishing, but just even in, relationships and things like that. I mean, it's not just a hangout. I mean, I've literally had people come in here that they didn't need to buy anything. They just needed a hug. And I'm like, that's great, man. I mean, I've had people come in here that just wanted me to pray for them. I'm like, awesome. I'm down. Let's go. Yeah. That's what we're here for. And so from that respect, it's a very different model than most fly fishing retail, because I think for us, I tell people all the time, like, you don't have to buy anything. I'm like, that keeps the lights on, but whatever. Like, we want to teach you, we want you to be passionate. That's what we're about. Like, if we can take the passion that we have for this sport and give a little bit of that to you to where it ignites and becomes your own, that we've done our job.
Is there any shout out you'd give to maybe a specific customer who's come in and actually you've seen improve over the years through this kind of hospitality?
Oh man, at this point, there's probably hundreds. I mean, we've had customers that now are our staff. I mean,
No kidding.
yeah, no, I mean, like we most of our hiring's done internally, like where basically we watch, people grow in the sport. And I mean, I think that's probably the most incredible side of it is we'll watch them. They get passionate. They come to all the events, but as they are here more, they learn our culture as a shop. They learn our, habits as a shop. And I mean, I've got guys that guide for me. I've got people that, work here that most of them started out as customers and that the relationship deepened over the years. And like, hey, come on board. You know what we're about. So, I mean, I would have, if I was going to give a shout out to anybody, it's really my staff. I mean,
for sure.
Because they truly, I mean, literally most of them, if not all, Melody, my sister-in-law, she's the store manager. I literally brought her on to do a lot of the data entry, kind of bookkeeping stuff, and just trying to get orders laid out. And and she's done a marvelous job. She does more than anybody, including myself, will ever know. And the thing that's incredible about that is I said, look, I don't really need you to answer the fly fishing stuff. I can take care of that. Cause it was literally just at that point, my wife, Emily, we had, I think she was either pregnant with our first or we just had our first. We were about to, I think we brought Melody on right about that time frame. I can't remember. Melody would know. But she remembers everything. But for me, I was just like, we need somebody to really kind of handle the nuts and bolts side of the business. And I can still do a lot of the floor stuff and everything like that. And so we did that. And well, long and short, it winds up that, I volunteer for a lot of stuff. I'm part of Trout Unlimited. I serve on a bunch of stuff now that I didn't then, but it's just, there was a lot of other things and still guiding a little bit on the side too. And so when I was gone, she's at the store and she's like, well, I do have to know this. I don't know if I've seen anybody learn it quicker.
Wow.
I mean, and now she is insanely knowledgeable on the sport, on the industry, on the product. There's stuff about the product downstairs that she knows that I don't know, I'm sure of it. And I mean, she definitely knows when it's coming in. I sure don't. But I mean, that's the thing that is really cool about it is she learns so fast and she's a great angler. And I think that's just yet another testament of like, if you apply yourself and you learn, and the thing to her credit, and that's something that I think anybody listening to this could take notes on, when she didn't know the answer to a question and had to grab me and I'd go answer it for a customer, she stayed right there and listened to the answer. And so many people are very quick to delegate and move on. And sometimes you need to delegate, but stay. Yeah. Because you glean that info and it becomes yours. And you understand the reasoning behind that, that answer. And so, somebody's like, they'll walk in all the time at the shop and they're like, I've got a question. I'm like, I've got an answer. And if I don't know it, I'll find it. I'm like, it's just, we'll get you there. I'm like, or I know someone who does, that's the whole point of like, even if I'm not going to make something up, but it's one of those places of like, if I don't know it, I for sure know somebody who does. And that's the thing of like, we want to be that avenue to help connect people to get their problems solved. And I think that should be the goal of every, fly fishing retail outlet is, it's not just customer service and product availability and that. It really is, can you be a learning center? Yeah. I mean, can you be that place that people really want to come to just to get their answers and say, how do you do this? And it doesn't mean they have to do it the same way you do. It just, they want to glean that information to build their own knowledge set. Because as you well know, this sport becomes your own. Yeah. There's no two people that do it exactly the same.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that actually was more of a testament as to the environment that you guys have been able to create, having so many people come through and actually stay, become passionate, and then better themselves through it, which is, pretty spectacular if you ask me. One of the things I do want to ask is so you mentioned your first time being on the retail side of the industry. From that moment, how long did it take you to get into the opposite side, be essentially from the outside looking in? Okay.
So I would have been, from actually being exposed to the retail side, it was probably, 5 years, 6 years. It wasn't long.
Yeah, it wasn't long at all.
No, it wasn't long at all. I mean, honestly, it was probably 5 or 6 years to be actually working at a big box store and knowing fly stuff. Was an avid tyer at that point, avid angler. Probably had no idea what I was doing in fly casting, but I could cast a fish. I guarantee you I didn't know all the theory and stuff behind it. But the other weird part about that is if you look at the start date from there, it was, roughly 8 or 9 years later, pursued going through casting certification and all that sort of stuff. And by then I already had a fly shop. I worked at big box retail. I actually started guiding while at Sportsman's Warehouse. And so the actual business became a business in '06. I was still working there. And then they hired me back on. I left there to actually go into guiding for a while. And they didn't really have anybody on the sales floor at the time that knew anything or knew much about fly fishing. I won't say knew anything. There were still some really great staff members there, but they didn't have anybody that was their focus. And so I talked to them because I still go down there and buy stuff. And they're like, look, would you be interested in coming back? We'll give you a raise. I'm like, well, I should have quit sooner. But, it's one of those things of, they said, we'll do this. And you can fly fishing's what we need you for. I'm like, look, guys, I'm guiding. I was still going to school part-time. And I was like, I am busy. They're like, we need you 2 days a week. And anybody that has questions, we'll just divert them to those 2 days or whatever, and it's like, okay, I can do at least that. And so went and kind of started remodeling. I started writing down everything we needed to stock and all the changes we needed to make and everything's like that. And long and short at the time that entity was in financial trouble. And I didn't know that. You're a floor worker. You don't know that. And so I put together all the orders and did a lot of them on my own time. So in the store, I was going through the product that we had and going through all of that. And then I took vendor catalogs and was able to write out all the orders, item numbers, everything like that, cataloged them, and then we were going to send them to the buyers. Well, I did all that. We sent it to the buyers, and they basically shot me down and said, we don't want to do that. Well, they knew what was coming.
Oh, okay.
So as a result, we don't have any Sportsman's Warehouse in Texas anymore. And it was a really great store. I mean, and I know a lot of people throw shade at big box retail, and I'm one of them. But it's one of the things that store was very different. The staff that we had, I don't think I've ever been in a store that was like, all encompassing, like everything from offshore to inshore to, tournament bass fishing to catfish to carp to whatever, to fly fishing. I mean, it had all of it, but the staff had done it all. Like if there was anybody that came in with a question, we could get it answered amongst ourselves. And I mean, with experiential knowledge.
Yeah.
I've never seen that in a big box store staff ever. And we had a couple of guys that were solid tournament bass anglers, like really, really good. And it was, and obviously had fished locally for years, but we had a lot of sticks that were part of that staff. And so it was kind of unique in the fact that when we, like, for instance, the inshore game, the Sportsman's Warehouse was based out of Utah. They know nothing of the Texas coast.
Yeah.
So immediately when we saw the demand for that, and our store manager was a major coastal freak and loved it. And he's like, we've got to have this stuff. We've got to have this stuff. And so they brought on, as a corporate company, they actually brought on a lot of brands that were known here and in many cases made here. And we were able to tailor the coastal selection, and it was amazing. I mean, it was truly good. Wow. And I was just like, this is awesome. I know it wasn't that great in the fly side, but the actual, hard bait and soft bait side was great. Corporate retail doesn't allow you to tailor anything anymore. The big box stuff. That store did. And it's really sad that we lost it, honestly, because I actually, when they shot me down on the fly side, that was where I had the thought. I was still in school and I was like, somebody should do this. I'm like, somebody should do this. And I was really struggling to find a major. Like, I was just like, I was great in school, could, aced it in college, but I just couldn't find. I was going to go into fisheries biology. That was where it was. And that's hence the major nerd factor. Cause I was the kid that was reading Autobahn guides, instead of playing video games. So it was one of those things of like, I was a major nerd. And so I wanted to go into fisheries biology, but I just got to looking, I was like, you're going to be a tech for a number of years. Then you're kind of, everybody's got seniority and you're kind of waiting for your opportunity to get in. You're probably going to have to relocate if you're going to get any sort of promotion. Yeah. I was like, this is home. I want to be in Texas. And I love fishing other places, don't get me wrong, but like, this is home. I want to be around family, and, my family was here. And I was just like, this is me. This is where I want to be. This is the water I cut my teeth on. I'm too passionate about it to leave it. And, my dad, in all of his wisdom, he's like, look, you need to pray about this. He's like, you really do. He's like, I truly believe that, you'll hear what you're supposed to do. And he goes, and whatever you hear you're supposed to do, he's like, even if I don't agree with it, He goes, if you believe that God told you to do it, I'll support you in it.
Wow.
And I was like, that's a bold move. And to trust your kids that much that, you know, they can really pray and hear the Lord. And man, it was weird. I'm sitting there in college just going like, what am I doing? Taking science majors courses and all this stuff. And I'm just like, and so I did. You had that soul searching moment, and it was that place of, you know, locked yourself in the prayer closet for a little bit. And you're just like, okay, God, you know what you made me for. And that's, and I'm not saying I'm doing this forever, but it's that place of, at that moment, you know, it was start a fly shop. And I was like, that is the weirdest, most non-spiritual answer you'll ever get, you know. Yeah. I'm just like, and I mean, and it's a, you know, and it's my story. And the thing that's crazy is it started in 2008, and it was
during the financial crisis too.
Oh yeah, dude.
God,
it was terrible. Like, it is like when we've actually got the date on the front of the store here, what you see now and where we're having, you know, we're doing the podcast. This is not anything like how this store started. Like, really? No, the loft up here is, you know, darn near as big as our first store.
I mean, it's spectacular up here, I'm not gonna lie.
It's a beautiful place, but the first store was 500 and change square feet. I think it was 577, if I remember correct. I'd have to go look at my old rent checks, but it was $1 a square foot. Wow. And so it was $1 a square foot. And that was the one thing I drove. In fact, it's really funny. A lot of people don't know this. When we were looking for space, I was like, I need to do this. Like, this is, and my dad's like, okay. He goes, and when I say a little bit of money, it was a little bit of money put away for college. And he goes, you will wonder the rest of your life if this will work. And he goes, I have a little bit put away for your college. If you believe this is what God wants you to do, we can do that. And it wasn't much, but it's not nearly as much as what people think. And it wouldn't even buy a year of school anywhere around here. Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't a lot in that spectrum, but, you know, to start something. In fact, if you were to take that same amount of money now, you couldn't open a fly shop. Yeah, it's impossible. It wouldn't have happened. So there's a financial crisis. Everything is, you know, the economy is, I won't say it was a recession, not a depression, but it was one of those places. It was rough. Yeah. And we're doing $1 a square foot on 577 square feet of, this is the funny part. The first space was actually a cat shelter. Really? It's a strip center, and there was a cat hospital across from it. And they had this charity that they would take all these cats and they would house them, and then people would adopt them. And they literally were using that space previously. They weren't at the time, but previously they had used it as a literally cat home. And I walked in there, and it was just covered in all and sundry cat stuff. Mm-hmm. And so there was a kitty door in the bathroom door, like I was just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with that? So, you know, all that, I looked at it, I was like, I can make this work. So we gutted the thing, you know, remodeled it, put new flooring in. I bleached every inch of that trim and wall. I mean, it was just, we 409 and bleached. I probably shortened my lifespan from cleaning that space out. But anyway, all of that being said, you know, you walk in and it was like, wow, this, you know, it was small. It was funny. I knew people that walked in and laughed. They're like, this will never make it. Really? Oh yeah. I mean, and they openly tell me that now. A good friend of mine, Kevin Hutchison, he goes, we walked in that store the first time, and he goes, and I just walked out like, oh, what is this kid doing? He's like, you know, it'll never make it. He said you had the warehouse down the street. You had another shop in West Austin. You had, you know, there was another outlet down in Austin. I don't think Orvis was still in play at that point. I think they'd closed the factory store, but nonetheless, there were a number of, you know, outlets within the Austin area for fly fishing that were much better known and much better equipped. And, you know, that it's not just some kid running a fly shop. I was 21 years old when I opened this place. And did I have a 5-year plan? Absolutely not. But the thing that was crazy is a lot of people laughed it off. But the thing that I wanted to be is what I didn't have growing up here. And that was, I didn't have a fly shop. And so for me, all I ever knew about fly shop was Joe. And so I was like, a good model. Yeah. Yeah. And so that was the point of like, we're going to do this and be education based, event based, and build community. And it was slow beginnings, but I say slow, it grew pretty quick. But the first time that I was looking for space, I actually drove down here in downtown Round Rock. This is where I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And I drove my car down around here, and I was just like, man, there's no way I can start down here, but this is where it needs to be. And long and short, that's where we've wound up. But it started a little bit off the highway. And we started fly tying nights and all that. We actually wound up renting the space next to us and knocking a wall out. And it grew. And then we moved into a second location here into downtown Round Rock. And it stayed there for, I think, 5 years. Now we've been here for 7.
What was the hardest part of going from being essentially, I assume it was nerve wracking opening the shop, but what was the hardest part between that point to the moment where maybe you felt confident or that you had actually made it work?
I'm still not sure if I've made it work. No, I mean, honestly, I don't think we've ever arrived.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, and I say that, somewhat humbly because for me, I see it's kind of like, if a guest walks in your house and they're like, this is so beautiful, but you see everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And it's for me, I'm just like, we still are struggling with this. We're still doing that. We don't have this. We don't have that. And used to like in the beginning days, you wanted to add more brands. That was, you started out with this super small brand envelope. And we started out as a fly tying store. That was the thing that I was rabid tire.
Yeah.
And so like, that was a part of like, we need materials. And so what was cool about it, we had like a couple of rods. We had a whole room of fly tying materials. And I know shops that some of that's actually put some shops under, like where you can't make any money off that stuff. And, and it's painstaking to maintain and to order and all that. But we didn't have it. And even my competition down the street didn't have what I had. So I carried everything they didn't. And the stuff that I wanted to order for them, fun fact, the same stuff that I wanted to order for them, I turned around and ordered for me.
Really?
Yeah. So, because and the thing that was crazy is I already had an idea because I was working on the inside there. I'd been in retail there for 4 years. I knew what things cost. I knew what things retailed for. I knew how to merchandise. And it was a really good boot camp because when you're learning how to merchandise at corporate retail, you get some skills on that pretty quick. Otherwise, you don't make it. And for me to actually merch my own store and order with vendors, I found out, I didn't know this was at the time, there's a brand of nets that was made here in Texas that it was actually my first fly fishing net that was any good. And I was actually going to go trout fish in Colorado. I was like, I guess I probably ought to do what everybody else does and get a net. And so I got one, and the company was Wachter Woodworks, and Ed just recently retired. So congratulations, Ed. But I called him and said, hey, I was like, I'm opening a fly shop. I want your nets. And I was like, are y'all doing that? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. I was like, out of sheer curiosity, I'm like, I was told, I said, I previously worked for Sportsman's Warehouse. I said, I was told that we couldn't order those. And they're like, oh, no, that store can't order any of ours. They said they owe us a lot of money.
Really?
And so what was interesting is you could see the writing on the wall then. But, on the inside of it, when you're just like, oh, we can't order a product, you didn't know.
No, why? Yeah.
Yeah. So they were majorly overdrawn, but I could carry them.
Yeah.
Because it was a small order and I was going to pay them immediately. And so it was funny because that's kind of how some of the things came about, is kind of right time, right place, right era, right everything. But as far as like now, I still don't think we've made it. I mean, we do. I mean, my staff is incredible. And I think as a shop, we do a really good job of education and bringing new people into the sport and being approachable. And I don't think we're pretentious. Maybe somebody does, but like we just like people.
Yeah.
I mean, we love people and want them to come in. I mean, it's so funny. We have people, they'll come in and be like, where's your minnows? Because I'm sure we get listed on Google as like bait shops or something like that.
Yeah.
I have people coming in looking for minnows all the time. I'm like, just simply say we don't have them. And if they ask fly fishing questions, answer it.
Yeah.
And if not, tell them where to go get them. Help them with their answer. Like, it's not, we don't carry those. That's other places.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, no, tell them where to get them. Like, help them out. I don't care who it is. And I mean, we've had hilarious stories along the way about some of this stuff. But, for us, have we made it? No, not yet. But I think we've done a really great thing.
Let me rephrase that question then. When did you feel like you had built a community that you were almost essentially proud of in regards to the family around the shop, with people coming in and all those other things that we've already talked about, mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of people that are listening to this will remember Matt Bennett. Matt Bennett is an Umpqua fly designer. He started coming to the shop when it was in its original location and started coming to my fly tying classes. And he'd already tied a little bit, but most of, his heavy tying took place as a result of Living Waters. We were his shop. He bought all his materials there. And he and I became fast friends and fishing buddies back in the early days. And he actually worked here for 3.5 years. And he really took the shop to another level because I was able to still get out and guide, but then I had somebody who knew the fly tying side and the fishing side working as well. And then in the original days, and we joke about this all the time, Jeff Holter, who still works here, I said, "You're the longest standing employee, Jeff." I'm like, back then he was like, "I can cover the shop while you were, out guiding." And I was like, "Really? You would do that?" I mean, I'd never met Jeff. And so, I mean, he started coming to the shop and hanging out, and he'd come up and tie flies. And I'm sure that Jeff might have seen a customer or two a day back in those days, but he'd sit there and tie flies and fill his own box or fill the bins or whatever else. And a lot of people don't know this. When I opened the store, we did not have enough money to open an actual fly vendor. So I tied every fly that we sold.
Really?
Yeah. Every single fly that was in the bins, I tied originally. Wow. So, because we didn't have customers.
Yeah.
So it's like, I have time. And so to rephrase that on the community side, we built it somewhat instantaneously, where I had a lot of people that I knew from the warehouse that followed me over to the new store. And it was weird. I was still friends with that entire staff over there. And a lot of them were fishing buddies and really good friends. They referred a lot of people to me when they didn't have the answers.
Wow.
Well, once that happened, they wouldn't go back over there.
Yeah.
It was just, they found their fly shop. So between events and, community outreach and a lot of it was so weak in its presentation. It was so innocent. I mean, like I look back at stuff now that I'm like, oh, that turns my stomach to think that I ever had a bumper sticker that looked like that or something. It's just like, oh my gosh. But it was so genuine and so, innocent in its beginning. And I think that's the thing that I actually cherish. That's kind of like, when you see pictures of you as a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, my parents dressed me in that, and you're just like, but you didn't have a say in it, and there's a part of it that feels a little bit like that, where it's like, even though you were trying to build something, I don't have millionaire investors. I mean, a lot of shops do, or they have trust funds or whatever else. We don't have that. Yeah. And so it is very innocent, and it's in the way it took shape. The community almost formed immediately. And we started doing, Brushy Creek cleanups and crawfish boils. And a customer would say, "Hey, I'll come do the boil for you. Get these people cleaning up the creek." And, we had people pitching in and really, really being community. But I think the part where I realized its power of, what community could do is what happened within the last 3 to 4 years on Brushy Creek. That I would say, I think that I kind of had a little bit of a proud dad moment. So
you're talking about the cleanup event?
No, it was actually, we had a major, it's actually kind of double-sided. As a lot of people know, Round Rock has exploded, our hometown. In the 70s, there were 3,500 people here or whatever it was, just under 4,000. And now there's like 150,000 plus. It's a suburb of Austin, so it's going to grow quick. And, and it's still just lights out growth right now. But the thing that's interesting about it is Brushy Creek, the town, I mean, it's 69 miles of creek, but it runs right through town. We're 90 seconds from it right here. I mean, it's literally that building out that window. It's just off the other side of that building. So the big building in the back, if you look over it, the creek's right beneath it. So, I mean, that's how close we are to it. With that being said, like fishing pressure obviously mounted as population grew. And, we've long known, and I've long known, that there's Guadalupe bass in the creek. And with working, and one of the partnerships that we really have with the store is with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And part of that is I've always loved dealing with state departments because I was going into fisheries biology. So the nerd side's definitely there, but I also really love the process and really love dealing with, the conservation side. So, I mean, within the store, we kind of have 3 pillars. It's, education, community, conservation. Those are the 3 things that the store stands on. If what we do doesn't embody at least 2 of the 3 of those, hopefully it's 3 out of 3, we're not doing it. Yeah. So there's got to be multiple elements in that. But with the community, the thing that was so cool is we've had 2 new regulations pass on Brushy Creek. I think it's in the last 4 years. It might be the last 3 that, Texas Parks and Wildlife puts it out for public hearing and vote. And it was initially to ban all seine nets and cast nets because people were just going in there and catching bait for trot lines and, seining up all the minnows to go crappie fish on Granger or whatever else. I mean, there was so many different things. And mind you, that's been done for, decades and decades and decades. But the thing that we we didn't have then that we have now is just this influx of people and population and usership on this creek, and especially this downtown corridor. It has to be protected. Otherwise it will go away. And as a result, the fishing down there's still been amazing down in downtown Round Rock. It's awesome. But the first reg passed where we actually, got the cast nets and seine nets, like Texas Parks petitioned for that, or put it forth before the commission, and basically kind of grandfathered the creek into what's called a community fishing lake regulation. Now, mind you, it's not a lake, it's a river or a creek, but the thing is the regulation was the same. So it actually protected some of, it was by rod and line only was the only fishing method. You could no longer do, cast net, seine net. And I think there were some regulations that changed within the bass realm as well on that first reg. So that one, where it happened is it goes out to public comment. Man, we tooted that horn pretty loud. And I was like, guys, this is the chance. We've got a chance. And the reason why that happened is I met with Inland Fisheries, actually up here in the very same room we're in. Marcos de Jesus, Patrick Ireland. I know Austin Orr was involved with TPW at that time. And so, we all kind of chatted and went around the creek, and I actually drove them around. I drove Patrick and Marcos around to different spots in the creek, said, here's what it looks like in different places. Here's habitat, just a really good kind of cross section. And I don't even think Marcos had been to the creek yet. And I think that was his first time ever seeing Brushy Creek, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong on that, but I think that's the first time he ever was there. And when they started doing all the creel surveys, and then when they did electrofishing and everything, the Guadalupe bass that are in here are genetically pure.
Wow.
And as a result, that's one of now, I think, in talking with Tim Birdsong recently, it's, give or take 15 populations of managed Guadalupe bass in the world.
Wow.
And so that was the reason, because they're so pure, they're so good. And and it's kind of an isolated population because it's just in the creek. Because of that, like the creek merges with the San Gabriel River, but the Guadalupe bass in the reaches that this converges with are actually hybridized naturally with spotted bass. There's natural integration down there.
Yeah.
So we've got this satellite population of just epically pure fish. And they're like, that was the reason for the reg, is they're like, there's a ton of people when they did the creel surveys. They're like, we had no idea there was as many people fishing this creek. Yeah. And they're like, and yeah, fly anglers are part of that, but that wasn't most of the user hours. There was a lot of others. So with that, people always ask, they're like, aren't you concerned about, like advertising your creek and things like that? Because so many people fish it now. I'm like, what are fly anglers doing? They're catching and releasing darn near everything. That just educates your fish base. So it's making them harder to catch. Sure, they're educated. And as a result, it actually, I think, has helped the creek overall, because if you fished it 20 years ago like I did, I've lived here for 30 plus years at this point, it used to be pretty darn easy. And now it's a little bit tougher. I know a lot of people that struggle on the creek, and it's tough because the fish have really hyper fixated on natural insects and, hyper fixated on natural forage base. And they don't really go off the reservation much for that. If you throw a chartreuse popper down there, I can hear the fish laughing at you from here. Like they are really focused on that. So the community voted for that reg pass. And then we had a second one pass that now even our sunfish and cichlids are protected to some degree. And so we've had 2 regs passed, and those have been slam dunks from our community. And we had a lot of people that protested it, like, because you get positive and negatives on both sides. And I talked to the department. I said, so how close was it? And they're like, not even. They're like, really? They're like, everybody wants what y'all want. And I was like, this is cool. They're like, yeah, we had some people in opposition. They're like, and they were trashing us on Facebook and everything like that. Yeah. And they was like, we're going to
taking my rights.
Yeah,
my God.
Yeah, we're going to stop this. And, elite fly fishers and everything. I'm like, I don't care about the fishing. I want my fish to make it.
Absolutely.
I'm like, if I never got to fish it again, but I knew my Guadalupe bass were safe, I'm okay. I'm like, I know that sounds weird, but like, I care that much about just the fish. And so our community, it mobilized, and dude, it's now protected the creek that the shop used to be like really close to. We were right around the corner from the creek. Everywhere we've had as a shop location, it's right near the creek. Yeah. And so it's home water. So that, and then we had the sewage spill issue with Round Rock, where they weren't treating water right and putting it in the creek east of town. And it was devastating, like huge fish kills and all that. the community mobilized. I was on the news several times and all this sort of stuff. I had to go to city council meetings, and basically the city spent $20 million to fix it. And so that was community driven. I mean, like that would have not happened at all if it weren't for the fly fishing community.
Wow. I mean, I guess that goes to show the importance of local elections, but it's funny. I've never heard essentially like an argument for conservation and increasing pressure going hand in hand. That's actually really funny.
Because it's a way of life.
It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get anything different on the coast.
Yeah.
Increased pressure is a reality. More people are going to fall in love with it. More people are coming to Texas. Saltwater fishing is a blast. And you're going to hear a lot of opposition of like, well, now I can't go fill my cooler. I'm like, I mean, I love eating fish. Fish are great. That's awesome. But I'm like, they're also several dollars a pound at your grocery store. It's one of those things I'm like, but keep in mind that like the usership, if it doesn't couple with conservation, and I don't begrudge somebody's right to keep a fish. It's not that at all. It's being very intentional about when, where, and how you do so.
Treating it like a fishery, not a grocery store.
Sure. And I mean, and for me, don't disrespect the fishery just because it's your, quote unquote right to do so.
Bingo.
And I mean, and I think that as soon as we make conservationists, and that doesn't mean you chain yourself to a tree, and it's the place of, I mean, if you want to do that, I think there's a better way, but nonetheless, I mean, and I've had to fight for trees in riparian areas on Brushy Creek over the last several years. But when you make, and that's kind of our structure, when you educate, you build community. When you have community, you can mobilize conservation. That's those three elements. And that's why we've done it the way we've done it. And I mean, because if you make community, but they're not educated, they don't know what they're doing. And if you have conservation, but there's no community behind it, then you've just got one guy out there that's, an advocate. I need an army of people and that are fiercely loyal to their water and their fish. And not for the sake that they want to harvest them, but because they derive enjoyment from it. And that, I mean, I wrote something the other day. I dabble in that as well. And I said, there's many times in the mountains that I love Rio Grande cutthroat trout, something I'm very passionate about and do a lot of conservation work for. But I'll literally just set the rod down and just watch them. Yeah. And then I'll be like, I'm good. I'll pick up the rod and walk past him. And I said, some people say that I'm getting soft. And I'm like, I just don't want to be an interruption in his daily schedule. Yeah. I'm like, I just the pleasure of seeing him and knowing that rare fish still occupies that rare water is enough for me a lot of times. And I mean, I get it. I used to be driven and want to go catch everything. But once you've caught, I've done this for a living now. I've been in the fishing industry for 20 years. So once you've done it that long and fish tournaments and been all over the world, and it's just like, I just appreciate the fire out of being out there. For sure. I mean, it's just like, I want to be in the room. It's kind of that place of just like, I want to get there and I want to watch it happen around me. If I get to interact with any of it, awesome. But the fact that I get to see it all, I mean, it darn near takes my breath away talking about it. Yeah. It's funny because it sounds very similar to something like Bud Rowland was able to do way back when, I think it's the 80s or 90s. And he was actually able to build a community around fly fishing because he started using like the food chain to implement fly fishing in school curriculums. And he got it so far to the point where you'd have 8 to 10-year-olds wanting to have their birthdays around or at the shop. And it was like one of those things where it's like, I think that fly fishing has made an impact because of things like that, where it was community based and actually trying to bring people in more so than just feed your own addiction, if that makes any sense. Now, I wanted to shift a little bit to more intrapersonal experiences, because I do want to know what inspired you to want to actually take the casting more serious. So casting side, and we mentioned this a little earlier, just kind of as we were getting ready. I had already done, it's funny you mentioned birthday parties. I'd already taught casting at birthday parties. I was already given a few lessons and things like that. And as I started the shop, casting lessons, you're going to get asked for that because people don't know. So when you're doing intro to casting and teaching people about all that, I knew enough to be dangerous, I would say that. Nice. I mean, and I could cast. I mean, I wasn't a bad caster, but as far as like growing in it, there were a couple things that I would really credit. Number one, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I was at, there was a show that kind of made it around Texas. It was hosted in Austin at one point. It was called the Shallow Water Expo. And a lot of it was a heavily saltwater show. Like, I mean, it was, skiffs and shops, and, Enrico Puglisi was there with all his stuff. And, it was great. There was so many people. You get to shake hands with some of the greats, and it was a really great show. I wish it was still here. But anyway, all that being said, they had these saltwater casting clinics and stuff like that. And so Sportsman's Warehouse had a booth. Mind you, it wasn't a very good booth, but it was a booth. And I got staff to man that. And so it's kind of one of those things of, it could have been anybody else, but it was me that day. And it's just those things that fall into place that you're just like, there's definitely something bigger than me going on. So it's just that place of like, happy accident. I don't really believe in those. I'm like, I'm more like divine intervention versus like coincidence. But anyway, nonetheless, I wind up at the Shallow Water Expo, and this would have been, I don't know, 16 years ago, something like that, maybe more. No, it's longer than that. The shop's been open for 16. So this would have been darn near 20 years ago. It's probably 18 years ago that this was, 18, 19 years ago. And I'm literally in this booth, Roland Martin, renowned bass angler and just guy's a, conventional fishing great, is in the booth right next to us. And so, we're parked next to him. There's a lot of traffic coming through. And I look, and this guy gets up on the kind of there's a casting lane in front of us. And I'd never been to a show that had a casting lane. I mean, we didn't have those. And I wasn't connected in the fly fishing community at all. Like, I didn't know there were fly fishing clubs. I mean, I knew at that point the San Gabriel Fly Fishers had just started.
It was a casting club, right? Or there was a casting club in Austin.
There might have been, but I wasn't in it.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, like, I knew so little because I didn't come up through the ranks.
Yeah,
like people that are getting connected through the shop now know so much more than I ever knew getting into it. I didn't have anybody to tell me what was right, what was wrong, so I tie backwards. But anyway, the whole deal being, I see this guy take the stage, if you will. He's taking the casting lane, and his name is Bill Gamble.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is. This guy named Bill, and he takes an Echo 5-weight, this little $100 rod, and I'm watching him, and he's talking about distance casting, and I tapped out for a second. I mean, we're right there at the lane, and I'm just like enamored. I tapped the other staff member. I was like, "Can I go watch this for a second?" He's like, "Yeah, we're slow. Go ahead." And everybody's gathered around, and I watch Bill, and I'm watching that rod move in ways I've never seen a fly rod move. And this guy, I will never forget this. It was hilarious. He takes it and bombs a 100-footer with a 5-weight. And I mean, and it's not name brand anything. Like, he's doing it on a stick that everybody else would have kind of turned their nose up. And Bill's just crushing it. I mean, the back cast area is not long enough for Bill. Like that's the best part, is he was having to struggle to get that because he was just airing out so much line. And I was just like, I did not even know you could do that. I'm like, I mean, I'm sure people can, but like, I didn't even know. I mean, the only like I had seen at that point, I hadn't been to an Oktoberfish and hung out with other instructors or anything like that. I knew that a couple of casting instructors were around town, but I didn't at that point. I want to say, yeah, Bill would have been my first, but like really seeing it in person, somebody do it like that.
Yeah.
And the casting lane, I think it might've been 80 or I think it was 100 feet long, or no, it was probably 80 feet long on the casting lane. Cause then there was a walkway at the end of it.
Okay.
And I will never forget this. He goes, "What if your redfish is way over there?" And he goes, and he lands one and he throws this cast and he just hammers that final delivery. And there's some like, college age girl walking at the end of the aisle, and the line's still dropping, and he lays it right over her. She walks right into it. She about jumps out of her skin. And I'm like, who could blame her? You're 100 and something feet away from that guy.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been a person on that lane casting more than 50 feet that day. So, I mean, you thought you were safe and sound, but I mean, not only was he, casting at distance, he was pretty darn accurate at distance. And I was just like, I've never seen that. So anyway, after he concluded the presentation, his crowd kind of clears up, and I tap him on the shoulder. I was like, "Bill, like, talk to me. I can't do that. Like, what do I even begin to do to learn that?" And I bought his DVD. I bought his DVD. So yeah, I was a paying customer. I bought his DVD on site, and he was super kind and just very, very generous. I mean, I was a kid, man. I was still in my teens, and and he was just so kind and so generous. And then Stacy Lynn, who's another, she's a guide on the coast as well.
I've been wanting to get her on the podcast.
Yeah, so
also.
she actually had a casting demo somewhere, I think just after Bill, if I remember correctly. And I watched hers as well. She was talking about, casting 2 redfish from a skiff and things like that. Actually had a casting platform up there, if I remember correctly, and was watching that. And so I wound up meeting with her at like the pond by my house. And it was so funny because I was young enough, I couldn't even drive yet. I remember that. My mom actually dropped me off. And it's like, if I'm going to drop you off with somebody, she's like, I want to meet this person. I have no idea who they are. So she met Stacy, and Stacy and I just saw each other a couple of weekends ago. And we were talking about this, and it was so funny. But I was asking like, how do you become an instructor? Because I'm doing things that, at that point, I think I was already at the warehouse at that point.
Yeah.
But anyway, I might have met with her before that. I can't remember 100%, but nonetheless, she told me a little bit about how to get involved with the CI track. And so that all kind of, I won't say sat dormant, but then once I opened the shop, the very first year we went to Oktoberfish, which is an event that was hosted by the Fredericksburg Fly Fishers and the Kerrville Fly Fishers at the time. They had two groups out there, and Fredericksburg did a lot of work with it, and they would host it, and we did it on the South Atlanta River in Junction. Those were the glory days, man. Like Morgan Shady RV Park, it was amazing. And so they had casting instructors out there that would teach lessons for free. You get into the event and you could do, accuracy, you could do roll cast, you could do singles, there was spay classes, all kinds of stuff. And Al Kreis, who's also since passed, I've never met to this day a casting instructor like him. And anybody that ever worked with him or studied under him would agree.
What made him so special?
To quote him, he says, always color with big crayons. Don't get in the weeds. He would, like, because you have people, for people like you and I that, we can distance cast and do some of that.
Yeah.
I literally taught a distance cast 2 weekends ago. And I was teaching this class. In fact, I actually got to teach with Bill following that for the instructors. It was super fun. But the thing that was really funny about it is I didn't want to throw a long cast. A distance cast for most people is 60 to 80 feet.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're not doing anybody any good showing them 120 to 140.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that. Some people don't even have the physical ability to do it, but most everybody can touch 80.
Yeah.
And so teaching somebody that's casting 40 how to go to 60 and then 60 how to go to 80, those are the breakthroughs we really need in this sport. The other part about it is like, if you set a hook on a 120-foot cast,
you're not catching that fish.
No, it's you just wanted to jump it and say bye. That was it. So, from a fishing application, it really doesn't have much purpose. And I said that in the class. I'm like, I can do the other stuff. I'm like, but that's just to help me with my control and ability. That's just, kind of the final frontier out there for nerds. I'm like, but for fishing, this is what you need to know. And we taught distance based on what you need when you hit the water. And that distance is typically 60 to 80. Yeah. And if people are great in that distance or comfortable with it, they're unstoppable. You can fish anywhere on the globe. And you're unstoppable. If you can put a cast semi-accurately at 60 to 80 feet, you're going to get the job done.
For sure.
And so for that's how I approached it. But when Al would teach casting, and I will never forget this as long as I live, he's got a group of, Federation, at the time it was the Federation of Fly Fishers. Then it became the International Federation of Fly Fishers. And now it's Fly Fishers International. There's been so many name changes and acronyms, it just wears me out. But anyway, back in the day, they were all Federation CIs and everything like that. And Al, I think, was the MCI of the group. He was the one that was the master casting instructor. And I was out there casting, and he would talk to the instructors. And I was like, look, y'all, I'm not a CI, but I'd go hang out with them because the event would always be slow until the evening. Everybody would go out and fish during the day, but the casting classes were all day long. And so I'd go sit over there in between their classes and just jaw with them. And then we'd try out rods and do that. And everybody would ask me, like, why aren't you a CI? And I'm like, well, I just haven't done it. And they're like, you need to do it. And everybody was pushing me. So long story short, I cast, and I told Al came around and he goes, young man, that's really nice. And then he saw a cast and he goes, what would happen if you did this? And before I could even answer him, he was gone.
What do you mean gone?
He just left. Which I thought was brilliant. He would make you answer the question. And so literally he goes, what would happen if on your forward cast, instead of stopping here, you stopped there? And you think to yourself, you just be pensive and kind of look up at the sky, and you turn around to look to see where Al was. He was already with the next person.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wasn't there to critique what you did.
Just wanted to help.
What was so funny though, I'll never forget. I was actually with a two-handed rod. I was doing some spay casting, and he goes, "That's really nice." He goes, "But what if you did this?" And he critiqued something about it. And I was practicing and doing it a couple of times, and I practiced what he told me. And I look over my shoulder to my left, and he's with the next student, and I see him over there grinning with his arms crossed, just nodding his head yes, because he had accomplished his goal. Mm-hmm. He let the student figure it out. And did so in such a way that it empowered them to feel like they solved the problem. It was a brilliant way of teaching.
Wow.
It was a brilliant way of teaching. Instead of being a know-it-all and going, well, here's how you do it, and this is the way you do it, and this is the style you do it, he'd literally just go, I really like that. What would happen if you did this? And just walk off. And obviously he would work hands-on for a lot more beginning casters, but once you were intermediate to advanced, you're not having to, rebuild the whole skyscraper at that point. You're needing tweaks. And so he would leave you with that and go work with the next person, but he never took his eyes off your shot. And I thought that was really cool. And so Al was somebody, he was like, color with big crayons. He's like, make sure that the student can understand exactly what you're teaching and don't teach down. And I mean, there will not be another one like him.
I like that. Yeah, it's funny because hearing you mention that, you can kind of start to see an illustration of the evolution of this fly casting teaching. I know when I did the episode with Bill, he mentioned that when he was kind of getting into the space, that there was only 4 schools of thought. So you had the Joan Wolfe and you had a couple other guys, and it was either my way or the highway. And it was almost like, and I hope I don't speak out of turn, but it seemed like they were kind of, again, teaching down, because it was like, you have to do what I do. And so to hear that there are, or there was, or were, or hopefully will continue to be people who will take that whole, it's your style, your way of doing it, but let me help you with X, Y, Z, is actually, it makes me excited, especially for people who are going to get into the sport in the future, either soon or, in a lot of time to come.
Yeah, and Al was, I think, a driving force in Texas behind a lot of that. He just had a no-nonsense family approach to casting. And he was just a wonderful, pleasant person. And there were a lot of people who studied under his train of thought that are still very much in the CI game, that they're great teachers and great instructors, and that it's really, really good. What Bill was mentioning, and I think this is something that I've thought about a lot as well, a lot of the people in the beginning, there was no other train of thought. I mean, they'd want it. I mean, like, they had formalized a system or a technique, and that wasn't around. I mean, they knew that basically what they did worked. And so if it works, you can teach it. But a lot of it was teaching a style.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay, because everybody has their style. I think one of the things for me that's really interesting, when you and I were both at that distance gathering in Seguin.
I was going to bring that up next, yeah.
Yeah, and so we were at that, and there were no 2 people that took that field that had the same style. But there are elements of all of them present in everybody. The thing that's really fun is when you start practicing other styles and seeing if you can do it other ways. I mean, so you can hit 100 feet. Who cares? That's great. I'm really happy for you. Can you do it all these different ways? Do you understand what's happening when you do it all those different ways? And that's the part where, for me, I think that's so cool. When you watch Rick cast, you watch Bill cast, you watch you cast, Austin cast, anybody cast, we watched all these people up there, throwing some pretty impressive loops and some pretty amazing casts. And I mean, it's awesome, but I don't get too tied up in the results as much as I do the process.
Absolutely.
I like watching people manipulate the cast differently. And then getting into the fact of the physics very much are similar. I mean, how you get there is your own way of getting there, but it has to abide. And I listened to your podcast with Bill, and he goes, it's pretty impressive. Nobody's debunked the 5 yet, and it's true, because that five essential breakdown. I mean, that was something that, obviously he's known for, and that we, the Federation that later became all the other things taught, ad nauseum, and still adhere to that. But nobody, even as equipment has changed and lines have changed and thought has changed and information is everywhere, those have not fallen.
Yeah.
And that's very impressive, because you look at some of the things that we're taught. I mean, I even have books in my office. There's printed material in those books. I'm like, that's actually not right. Like, that's not a steeplechase does not work. It's one of those things that, the distance game is one of it. But I loved, we did that in a shout out to everybody who was at the fly fishing roundup here in College Station. That was cool, man. We went out there, and that's a casting driven event in College Station. And so there were, a lot of fly FFI instructors out there. And there were some MCIs and a bunch of CIs, but they have a gathering the next day with all the instructors. And one of the MCIs, Jeff Ferguson, gets up there and he asked me, he's like, hey, I need you to be my guinea pig for one of these illustrations we're going to do. I was like, that's fine. And so it was a great teaching point, and I thought this was really, really good. He said, I want you to get up there. I'm going to bring a volunteer CI up and just, we're doing these, like, what if this happens to you as an instructor? How are you going to handle it? There's kind of these illustrations. And so he brings the CI up and he goes, all right, this guy's name's Chris. He's driven 4 hours to come take a lesson with you. He wants help on distance. Go. And so he asked me, he goes, so how far can you cast? And I'm like, well, he goes, let me see what you got. So, and Jeff had told me before, he goes, I want you to butter a 90. I was like, okay. So I send one out there 90 feet, and it's, made it look effortless. And when it gets there, it touches the ground, and the CI is like,
is that not distance?
He's like, so how far you want to cast? I'm like, I can't hit 100. And for the sake of the illustration, and so he looks and to be fair, I couldn't do that when I probably first became a CI. I probably couldn't quite hit 100. And that, or if I was barely doing it, and definitely not with any repeatability. And it was a really good illustration, because he goes, I can't do that. And Jeff goes, you mean to tell me this guy drove 4 hours and you have nothing to give him? You're a casting instructor. And it was a great point, because Jeff goes, I probably can't do it how good that looked. He goes, but I can help this guy. He goes, and here's why. He said, every distance caster is going to struggle with timing, loop shape, and power application. And it's true. Yeah. And those are the things. He goes, and you've got a phone that does slow motion in your pocket. He said, the one thing distance casters can't do is watch themselves. He goes, use that opportunity of time. Even if you can't do what they do, you can help them do it better, because the principles still apply. Yeah. And, and I respect that, because there's a part where in the illustration, in short, was you will eventually, as an instructor, get a student who does something you can't do or does it better than you. It's bound to happen. For sure. It's bound to happen to any instructor. And it's happened to me. And those are the things of, how do you help them do what they do even better? It's so fun to teach lessons and watch somebody's loop go out, and you're like, man, I need to work on my loop. I like that, because it means you're doing your job right. Yeah. And the thing that's really cool about it is that illustration wasn't meant to embarrass anybody. It was meant to make you think as an instructor, to go, what do I have to offer even when I can't execute how that person does it? And so those are the parts where even style, it's like, that may not be my style, but what if I were to teach that person another style? Or what if I were to take the essentials in that style and help them refine them? As an instructor, you can do that almost at any level. Yeah. And those are things that are important.
You mentioned the evolution of technology within fly casting equipment, and it's actually a conversation that you and I had that I wanted to revisit, but we had it at the actual conclave, where I brought up the idea that if you thought that rods had reached the pinnacle of their action, their technology, whatever you want to call it, or if you thought that there was something else that could, be bettered in the equipment that could result in better anglers.
Sure. And for me, I don't think that, again, kind of the same question with the fly shop. Have we arrived? No, we haven't. For fly rods, no, they have not. I truly think that with the fly rod industry, or really just the whole, industry as a whole, developing rods, anybody who, like, every brand out there makes a good rod. If you look at what fly fishing used to be, dial it back 20, 30, 40 years, and you look at what's available to the angler now for the same amount of money, it's unbelievable. used to a $700 rod was as high as it went, and they were good sticks. You can buy that same rod for probably $300 now. I mean, or less, probably less. And the other thing is there's also the side of marketing where there's, somebody markets a lot and they're saying this is the greatest rod ever. You pick it up and you're like, this may not actually be the greatest rod ever. Maybe I don't want to pay $1,200 for this. I really do think that Jim Barchi at Scott Fly Rods probably put this best. I think this is probably my favorite quote. I was walking the production floor with him one day. So I'm a pro team member for Scott, and they are unabashedly my favorite rod in the industry. I'm a Scott guy through and through. But he was saying, because you see the raw material, you see, the rolls of graphite, the rolls of fiberglass, you see all that, and you see it just on this giant roll. And a lot of times they have to keep it temperature controlled and all that sort of stuff. It's really, really cool. But anyway, with that being said, he literally walks over and he goes, we're really not using all that different material. He's like, we're just getting infinitely better at how we use it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that is a point that you can just take to the bank, because I think that's true of even fly tying. Look at some of the flies that are being tied out of natural materials that weren't tied, that material's been around forever. That bird's been around forever. That deer's been around forever. That elk's been around forever, whatever. But the innovation that's coming through it, that innovation wasn't there. And I think a lot of it's just the growth within that, that genre of the sport, that fly tying section of fly fishing is where there's a lot more innovation, and you've got more great tires coming up with great ideas. The rod game, I think, is similar, where you're seeing a lot of people do a lot of really great things that some of them are groundbreaking, and that I think some of it can be marketing and some of it can be hype. But when you see something that really comes out, you're like, whoa, that's never been done before. There's a lot of brands out there. I could drop a number of them right now that, they have changed the game on some of that stuff. And now there's these moments where I feel like look at when graphite entered the scene. That was a game changer. Is there going to be another material like that that's a game changer in the future? I can't say. But what I can say is, while we're still in the graphite age, if you will, that era, and even glass. Look at modern day glass. I've
always wanted to throw one of those like super glass or fast glass, one of those rods.
Dude, even the stuff with just, creek glass, used to glass was very noodly and all that sort of stuff. And because they were, and a lot of it, the blanks were built the same way. So, there's a linear fiber that goes through any blank, whether it's graphite or whether it's fiberglass, the linear material goes one way. Typically how blanks are made is it looks a lot like a waffle, where the lines go one way, then they'll lay the other one going the other direction, and then they just kind of cross hatch them until you make this strong blank. Typically the lines that are linear that go down the rod control a lot of the, dampening of the rod's, rigidity, action, flex, all that sort of stuff. The ones that go around the rod that are, kind of 90 degrees to the rod length itself, are really there for strength and for integrity. Well, graphite is a lot more fragile than fiberglass is when it comes to lifting power. And so it's interesting, like I believe it was Temple Fork Outfitters for a while. Their blue water rods,
you told me this. Yeah.
The bottom third of it was made of S-glass so that you could just straight lift.
Oh,
yeah. And so it's interesting that, we've gotten better. You would have never thought about putting a fiberglass butt section on a graphite tip, all that long ago.
Yeah.
And then you think about, there's rods out there that are blends now of glass and graphite. I've seen that where they've actually laid them up composite like that. You can see some of that. And you even see it in the bass fishing industry, where crankbait rods were fiberglass, or a composite blend of fiberglass where they bend more, where you're not pulling treble hooks out of a fish's mouth. It was really interesting. So that sort of technology has been... It used to be an all or nothing. It was all bamboo, all fiberglass, all graphite. And now you're seeing a lot of that technology either blend, or you see we're getting a lot better at using those materials, i.e. let's take glass again. Since glass has more hoop strength, the cross fibers, when a lot of times, I'm so glad you can hear the rain. I'm so glad we need some rain so bad. But that hoop strength, the thing that's really cool about it is that you don't need as many of those linear fibers. So glass now gets lighter because they can cut some of those layers out And now the rod is more responsive and less noodly because you cut the weight. You don't need the hoop strength as much because the material has it inherently in itself.
Yeah.
And so it's really neat to see how rod development has come, even in the last 20 years. But I don't think we've arrived. I think we're going to get better at it. I think even the ways that we use graphite or carbon fiber, if you will, I think we're just going to get better at it. And there's resins, there's tapes, there's layup processes, there's all these things that go into, and even just the componentry, there's all these things that go into making a rod that I think we're only going to see that improve because the market demands it. I mean, it's you have to be on the cutting edge. My dad has a quote that I love, and he goes, "If you're not exploring, you're dying." And it's so true. If we're too busy talking about the glory days and not talking about the memories we have yet to make, then all we're doing is just kind of reliving the past, and we're not actually we're not living anymore.
Yeah,
we're kind of just sitting on the couch going, "Man, it was good back when." And if you do that as a company, that's a problem because then your innovation dies.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you're no longer a viable concern. And that's something that I think even, within rods, you're going to see that innovation continue to be pushed because the market demands it. Will some of it be hype? Some of it be marketing? Absolutely. Will some of it be legit? 100%.
I totally agree. I recently had a conversation with Andy Deere, and I want to offer a little bit of what I would look for, I guess, like insight into that conversation, because one of the things that I kind of can see in the future, if people were to start taking a more non-stylistic approach, kind of what we talked about, your own custom way of doing it, is actually labeling rods in 3 line weights, essentially every single rod, right? So every rod would be 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 11. And one of the reasons we talked about it, or one of the reasons that I think it makes sense, is when Andy and I were talking about it, he explained, and we did it a little bit with the 7 weights and using the 5 weight with the 5 weight MEDs and stuff. But you can do so much more with a fly rod than you can really fathom when you start understanding that the line has so much more effect. Like, you can land things softer, you can throw farther if you need to with heavier line if that's what you want, but you won't be able to control it as much. And all these other things that I think would implement the success and the variation in terms of flycaster expertise. And I'm talking at the upper levels, right? I'm not talking at the lower levels. But I wanted to see if maybe you kind of agreed with that.
So for me, I've always been kind of I look at it this way. Every rod that I have on the shelf down there is listed as a single weight, and that, a 5 is a 5, a 6 is a 6, 7 is a 7. But you have to ask yourself, is that really the case? Because, in some cases, some rods are built heavier because the lines have gotten heavier.
Exactly.
For me, multiple weighting rods will likely never take off in the industry.
I mean, looking at it as a person, interpersonally, not actually labeled like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Interpersonally, I think, for me, I don't even, for our customers especially, I don't overweight rods because the lines are typically already there anyway.
Overweighted, yeah.
So, for if they buy a 6 weight and they're like, well, should I put a 7 weight on it? Because I've heard that, I can overweight it. And I'm like,
8.5 weight right there.
And I'm like, it's already 3/4 of weight heavy. You're going to be fine. Because the lines have now been crafted to more or less match the clientele and the rods. There are some rods, and I can tell you firsthand, like the Carbon series and the Ion series with an Echo, they despise overweighted lines. Despise them. Like they want something that is marginally overweighted at best. If you can throw true to grain weight on them, they adore you.
Yeah.
And so you would actually do better in many cases lining those down to get the rod to perform how you want it to. And they're $200 rods or $170 rods. They're not expensive. They cast beautifully. They're an amazing rod. And the thing I look at is if you overweight them, they're just kind of meh. They don't do what I want them to, but if you put the right line on it, and that's any rod on that shelf, you could take a, premium Scott down there if you wanted to. If it doesn't have the right line on it, you are not getting what that rod has to offer. Yeah. And I think the hardest part, and this is personal preference, so I will put this out. This is personal opinion. I'm a scientific angler's guy through and through. I will for always and ever be that, and barring any sort of major market change. But literally, they've been doing it. What is it, 75 years now or something like that, making premium fly lines? It's a long time. But a lot of shops, what they do is they'll carry a little bit of this brand, a little bit of that brand, and a little bit of this brand. And I don't think any of those shops, or a lot, in many cases, I won't say any, but in many cases, a lot of those shops don't fully know one brand. Mm-hmm. They know that taper and this taper, but they don't really know what lies within the brand. Mm-hmm. I've cast my way through a lot of fly lines. I mean, I've cast a lot of Cortlands, I've cast a lot of Airflows, I've cast a lot of Rios, I've cast a lot of stuff, and I've cast a few others that are, little, startup brands and stuff like that. I've cast a lot of fly lines. I enjoy casting, but the thing that I like is when you when you get really familiar with tapers, and it can happen throughout multiple brands. I'm not saying it can't. I think it's easier if you're within one and just kind of apply yourself and everything about those tapers and how they cast and how they perform and what they're made for, and even durability, how long they'll last, and is this something to take to the jetties or not? Those are things you need to come into realization on. But the thing that's neat about it is, for me, I have, like, if I were to sell a Scott Sector, for instance, it's a faster rod, but like if somebody is wanting more distance out of it and they wanted to do a bass bug taper, for the average customer, I'll say buy it straight up, put a 6 on a 6, but just be aware it's going to slow the rod down. If I've got a guy that really wants to wing it a little bit, I'm like, go down 1, because that rod's going to get a lot snappier. It's going to come alive. But I mean, for the average consumer, I would say just go true to true, because it's already overweighted for you to throw a big bass bug, because they're learning that. And it's not that it doesn't work. It works beautifully. And the line is amazing. But if you really want to like huck one, and actually carry a little bit of line, then sometimes dropping down that, because I think that line's almost two line weights heavy. So, I mean, it's up there, but it's an incredible line. Mm-hmm. But if you know that going into it, that from this caster, if you ask them, they probably have test casted the rod. You've watched them. Yeah. And you're like, that person needs this line on this rod because I know how that rod casts. If you kind of invest yourself in a brand, if you will, or even in an envelope of certain tapers to where you can solve problems, even if it's cross brands, you can make that happen for your customer pretty easily. Mm-hmm. But personally, a 7, 8, 9 rod, can it do all three? I think most of them can. Mm-hmm. We even at that conclave, you were hearing guys saying, "Hey, I was throwing a 5 on an 8, and really winging some line.
Someone at a 10, and
exactly." And I'm just like, I'm never going to do that. I mean,
I don't like the way it feels.
For me, I'm just not going to do it from the standpoint of like, I want to distance cast how I fish. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, and I'm just really
like true to weight stuff.
Yeah. It's just like, I throw an MED, like a mastery expert distance, all the time. Scientific anglers, if you ever hear this, for goodness sakes, make one in an amplitude smooth. Anyway, that needs to be the next custom line I do. Anyway, but no, the thing is, like, please make one with AST plus. But anyway, the whole deal being is like, with that line is perfect. If anything, I want one in an amplitude smooth that has a 15-foot longer belly. That's all I want.
Really?
If I could have that,
man, I feel like it'd be so tricky to hold because then you'd have to be holding 104 to get the same amount. Same amount. What?
No, you're at that point. I think full head length on that, isn't it upper 60s? I think it's like 65 or
68, which means you have to hold 86 to actually get the perfect shot. Or was the argument, right?
So the argument's that, but here's the deal: is if you're a person like me that likes carrying, the problem is when you hit it, if you don't have the head to hold on to, a lot of times it's like, man, I just need a little bit more so I don't have as much running line hinging. Yeah. So anyway, I would take about a 10 to 15 foot longer head. That'd be okay. Me and Bill were talking about that the other day. We were out casting, and he's like, "You're going for too much." He said, "You like having it back there." He said, "Just get rid of it." And I'm like, "I want it back there." He's like, "But you don't have enough head." I'm like, "Dang it, I want it though." I was like, I want to keep that line in the air so bad. I'm like, I like my back cast. Leave it there.
That's what Rick kind of taught me was, getting a little bit more out of the back cast. I think that's why I was so, I hope I don't sound cocky, but that's why I was so good so early, because I never had a forward cast up until, and I mentioned it at the conclave, but I never had a forward cast up until 2-3 months ago. But before that, it was all back cast, and the forward cast was just translating it over.
Just getting it over.
Yeah, and then once I figured that part out, it was pretty impressive. Do you want to use this opportunity to talk about the taper that you're working on?
I mean, I've got a taper that will be coming out here pretty quick. It's hard in Texas because we have the gamut. I mean, you're looking right now. It's blowing and rainy and windy and kind of sketchy outside.
Gloomy. Ugly.
Yeah, and then I think we have a low in the 30s, and it's going to be back up in the 80s in the same week. So I mean, we've had this like crazy weather in Texas, and The hard part is not many fly lines are built for Texas. We have taken a lot of fly lines and adapted them for here. But think about like the popular tapers, you think about like, I mean, even if we were to spread across brands, you look at, a Scientific Anglers MPX or a Creek Trout or, a Rio Gold or Rio Grande or any of those. And, you got a number of them in Airflow and Cortland and all that. Most of those are cold water lines or cool water lines. You start getting in some heat here and they do not do what you want them to do. They get really noodly. The MPX and the Creek Trout, they do a pretty good job if you're, creek fishing and stuff like that. But I mean, you get on the Llano, I've had some days out there where they can get a little sticky. Not a lot, but a little bit. And so that's the thing of like, and I will say this, within the coatings, I think SA's cool water lines hold up better in our heat than other people's that I've messed with. So, I mean, because we can get 100+ degrees. Scientific Angler used to make, they don't anymore, but they used to make a 5-weight bonefish line.
I remember that.
And when we would get like those nasty, like 110ers and stuff like that, I just pulled up the 5-weight bonefish line and I'd go out to them because the Llano, the thing is most of our water temp in the hill country isn't that bad, but since the Llano has like no trees on it, it's literally open sun. That I've seen that water gets like bath water in the summer. It literally is as hot or hotter than coastal water. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So when you're in the back lakes and you feel like those fish are like, man, there's just like bacon in here. It's like, man, it's the same thing on the Llano. But like on Brushy Creek, the water's still cool. San Gabriel water's still cool. And that's why those lines like the MPX, Creek Trout, things like that do so well in those contexts because they're still in cooler water. When you go to the Llano and you get those just brutally hot days that you probably shouldn't be fishing anyway, but we do it anyway. You're there, let's go. But they fish great. I mean, the bass eat grasshoppers all day and they're fine. It's not a problem. But, that 5-weight bonefish was handy. So what I wanted to do is make a line that could handle anything Texas could dish out. Not an easy task. So and obviously I wanted to name it the Texas Taper.
Which is a perfect name, by the way.
I mean, for me, it's like, I just, how could you not? It's like, if this is born and bred from here, for here, by people that live here, it's like this, it needs to be like, Texas.
Why not? Yeah.
So anyway, long and short, a little bit about the line. It's going to be, it kind of has a shorter front head. And it changes in head length based on weight. So it graduates up. It's going to run in a 2 through an 8. So full gamut. So if you're a lightweight, panfish, creek angler, it's got you. If you want to go wing it at a redfish on the coast, everything except for probably the hottest of hot days down on a boat deck, it's probably got you. Like it's really impressive. And it might even hold up in the hottest. We haven't done it on a skiff for a redfish yet because we don't have prototypes in the 8. But I had some guys in South Texas fishing at 100-degree heat and they were throwing big flies on a 5-weight and it was still turning them over, chucking it, and it wasn't getting noodly. So I was like, man, this is awesome. So the way we did it, I basically got with Scientific Anglers, said, here's what I want to do. You had 2 lines that I was very much a big fan of. You discontinued both of them. and that is the running joke. And if you ever see something that I'm a fan of in this industry, buy it. They will discontinue it because like, whether it's my sunglasses, whether it's, a fly tying material, or a reel, they've discontinued, or a line, they've discontinued everything. And I'm just like, goodness gracious, and then I never get it back quite how I wanted it. So I was like, well, if I had these 2 tapers that I really liked and they both had their own purpose, I'm like, what happens if I slam both of them together and there was an SBT taper and an ART taper. And they've both since gone the way of the dodo. But with that, I wanted to take those and blend them, add a little bit more handling line on the back side. And the SBT, I lengthened the head a little bit and then kind of kept it. I mean, I think it's pretty close to ART length. It might be a touch shorter. I don't remember off the top of my head. But the thing that was really cool about it is I was like, I want a line that is epically good and close, but that if you want to get rid of it, you can. Yeah. And one of the things that I do a lot is I fish in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico for Rio Grande cutthroat. It's like, wouldn't it be nice to have a line that I'm not restringing on my reels when I go up there or, whatever else. And I'm like, I could just have this one line that I could go anywhere and just do it. Whether it's hot down here, cold up there, I could just do it. Because some of that water temp's like in the low 50s and it's cold. So thinking about this, I was like, it needs to be on a multi-filament core. Because that's a cool water core. And I'm like, it needs to be on that so I have the flexibility. But there are lines out there that are on a flexible core with a saltwater jacket. And so basically you get the rigidity from the line's outer coating, but the multi-filament core keeps it limber and there's no memory because the jack in and of itself keeps the line a little bit stiffer and a little bit more true when it's hot, but it doesn't cause memory in cold months. And so like a perfect illustration of that would be like the Scientific Angler's bass bug taper. That's one that they've done. There's even a couple of saltwater tapers. They've done that too. The Redfish Cold is another one. That's the same premise there. What we did here though is I was like, the saltwater jackets, they don't float as high because you don't have to impregnate them with as much of the actual floating agent. Yeah. The actual spherical element that goes in there that causes it to float. You don't have to impregnate it with that as much because saltwater is more dense. It causes lines to float more. So what I wanted to do is create a blend of a fresh and saltwater coating. So if we were to use kind of a colloquial term for it, the goop that goes over the actual the actual core of the line. If you can get a goop that's blended and fresh and salt, and then take that, and from there, let's work on the rest of the line. So in talking with the folks up at SA, who are great, by the way, they're like, we've never done that. I was like, well, let's try it. I'm like, if it doesn't work, then we won't do it. But it's
simple enough. Let's do it.
Like, let's try it. And so they did it. And it worked like a champ. And so this line's coming out and it'll be out. It could be next week. It could be February. We don't have a really good time frame on it because it's since it's a custom, it goes into their production schedule. So we're actually waiting on a hole in their production schedule to get it done. I'm hoping by the holidays. My secret hope is like that would be my Christmas miracle.
It's on my Christmas list.
Yeah, thank you. That's on my Christmas miracle right there. It's like I need it. So, but anyway, long and short, they blended it. They sent me the prototypes. I laid out the head shape, and I wanted something that would do cold, medium, hot. And so I needed prototypes. So we got a bunch of prototypes and a 5-weight in first. And you've cast that one.
That's the 3-weight too, and I was so impressed with the 3-weight.
The 3-weight's a bomber, dude. It's insane. But I got the 5s first. And so I sent them to Brandon Bales in Alabama. He fishes, smallmouth and rock bass and all these sunfish, a lot of what we do here, but humid climate. It's hot in the summer, and these came in the summer. And I just told him, I'm like, I know you're going to fish these. He fishes carp a lot too. I'm like, you fish for the same stuff we fish for. Yeah. I'm like, let's go throw it over there and get an angler that I know is going to put it to the test. I sent another one to down a little further south in Kerrville, to Chase Smith. And then I sent another one to Austin.
Oh, Fish Chase flies?
Yeah, man.
That guy's very talented too.
He is an amazing tire and a quality person, but and a dear friend. I love Chase. He's awesome. But I knew that what he's going to do is he's going to throw a spook on it. And down in Kerrville, when you get down that kind of southern hill country there, it can get a little blast furnace hot out there in the middle of the day. And I was just like, dude, go fish it. Let me know what you think. Throw some big flies on it. Have fun. And man, all the reports. So I gave one to Austin, I think one to Chase, one to Brandon. I think that was it on the initial round, and I kept the 4th because I think we only got like 4 of them. So I did that, and then I called him in a couple of weeks, and I was like, Chase, what do you think? He's like, man, I wouldn't mess with it. And he's like, yeah, I tangled the running line a couple of times. He's like, but that, that's it. And he's like, but I also keep a lot of running line out when I fish. I'm like, yeah, but you've been fishing like saltwater lines that, they're going to have memory in cold water. He goes, 100%. He's like, that would be my only complaint is I tangled the running line a couple of times. I'm like, okay, good. I can deal with that. I'm like, I don't keep that much line off the reel most of the time when I'm fishing. So I'm like, we're okay. Brandon's like, don't touch it. And then I talked to Austin. He's like, you've got something here, dude. He's like, this cast beautifully. And so I took it out and it roll cast great. It single spay cast great. Overhead, it's amazing. Doing any sort of technical placement shot is awesome. And then when you practice with it at length, I wanted a line that I could like bow and arrow shoot really well. Because when I'm up in the mountains, I wanted something I could literally bow and arrow cast or cast inside of 20 feet, like literally 20 feet from me to the fish, not 20 feet of fly line. And I was like, I need something that picks up soft, lays down soft, and is like painfully accurate. So the way that I reshaped the taper a little bit is I kept it real slight, and then it builds up pretty quick, but it stretches over it's not like a real blunt step up. It actually stretches over a little further. You're not quite in the meat of the head quite as fast as you were on the other lines. Yeah. As a result, what happens is that thing is deadly and close. But when you get in the meat of the head, it just wants to go. So, I mean, we fished mouse flies on it in Colorado this summer, and we're just loving it. It would just bomb them. We could throw the whole line with a mouse on there. I'm like, nobody's going to be doing this with this line. I'm like, it was amazing to have a fly that was that big, that bulky, and you could just send it. But then when we backed off of it and did it in close, it's just accurate to a fault. The front 10 feet of the line is actually textured. because what that does is you're never going to handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, your rod's roughly 9 feet long. You're
How
never
often do you touch 10 feet?
exactly. You're not going to touch that last 10 feet. It also has their, enhanced, enhanced floating head, where it actually has more of the flotation property in the tip, and you have the texture. So that's also going to capture some air underneath it, slides a little easier. And the thing that's really cool about that in close, how much of that line are you casting? About 10 feet. So handling it in close, since it's textured, it slides through the guys easier, and it's going to just be effortless to cast in close on a 2 or 3 weight. So I basically made it where it's got this really specialized short game, but then it's got the powerhouse long game if you need it, and everything in between it's going to handle. The last, I forget, I think it's 10 to 15 feet, something like that, is also camouflaged, where it goes it goes tan green to where it breaks up the backdrop of the line. You're not going to get line flash out of it. And man, it's pretty cool. So
yeah, I loved it. I've been waiting to get the 8-weight version. Now, we've talked about the industry. We've talked about the technology and fly lines and rods and everything else. I want to maybe take a segue into your fishing, your fishing history. You mentioned that you were able to fish a lot of places around the globe because of what your dad did. Would you mind telling me some of your favorite places or ones that stuck out to you that you're maybe more grateful that you got to actually experience?
Absolutely. No, I mean, we travel to places that you probably wouldn't want to go fish, like Haiti, for instance. That doesn't really, I've caught some fish there, but I wouldn't rank that as among like one of my favorite fisheries or anything. But, some of that environment just needs a lot of help over there on their coastal front. But beautiful people, beautiful country, but it just, the conservation element is not there. It's a lot of scarcity, and it's, really, really rough. But we have some very, very dear friends over there. But the one that I think kind of caught me by surprise, I fished the Cayman Islands on the way through to some places. We were actually hosting a mission trip for a church out of the Caymans to go to Honduras. So I think my first fly jump tarpon actually was in the Caymans. I literally took a little 6-weight. And it had just a dinky little reel. I wasn't planning on doing anything epic at all. I mean, these days it would probably have gone better. But yeah, I mean, I had what I had, so here we go. And I walked down to the beach, and I was catching little barjacks. And just, I think I had like 10-pound, 12-pound test on it. It was nothing. And this very decent sized fish for that beach. I mean, it was probably, 40-ish pounds, somewhere in there. Decent size for that beach. And there were bigger ones there, but these local kids started yelling, tarpon, tarpon, tarpon. So I was like, oh, and I had a bait fish fly. I was like, what the heck? I mean, if he doesn't need it, he doesn't need it. I threw it right in front of him, and he just gets all over it. I set the hook, and that reel sounded like it was giving up its soul. I mean, like it was dying. Thankfully, the fish shook off, and I was like, well, that was awesome. I got like 2 or 3 jumps out of it, and I was like, okay.
Sign me up for another.
I was like, yes, please. More, again, once more. Where do I yell encore on this? But it was so cool because, I mean, like, that was something that I just kind of happened into. We went to Honduras, led that trip. I got to fish over there a little bit. We wound up, we've got some really great friends over there. It's actually in Guanaja. So, I mean, there's a fly fishing operation operating out of there now. There wasn't any of that back then. And my first fly caught permit was the first one I ever threw a fly at. And that it was the weirdest thing in the world. I had caught a couple of bonefish at that point, and I mean, never been guided, have no idea what I'm doing. I fished the Texas coast growing up like crazy because my grandparents, spent a ton of time down there, and they'd take us down, and my dad loved it. My uncle loved it. We all went down there. Yeah. So, I mean, coastal experience, I at least knew about, coastal fishing and stuff like that. And I'd studied it enough that I was like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. These are some of the flies I think I'll need. I caught my first bonefish on, it was actually I did a conehead Borsky slider and in a little size 8. And it smacked it, and I was along for the ride, and I was just like, this is awesome. And it was a good size one too. I was like really, really pleased. And I'm just still like shaking. I was like, I can't believe that just happened. And it was like on a 7-weight. So I mean, it's just, laying it to me. Let that go. I think it was the same trip. If it wasn't that trip, it would have been the very next one. But I get out there, and I'm bone fishing. I caught a couple that morning, and I'm walking around, and I get to this flat, and I see 2 black sickles poking through the surface. I'm like, oh no, permit. And there's bonefish ringing them. So literally I got 2 permit with bonefish all stacked up in this corner. They're all eating together. Yeah. And I'm like, here we go. And so I'm like, I got to tie a crab on. I've got some little shrimpy something or another. I'm like, I've got to put a crab on. So I can't tie a knot. You know, you guys got a permit tail in the air. You got 10
Hands
thumbs.
shaking.
Oh yeah. Hand shaking. You got 10 thumbs. You can't do anything. And interestingly enough, I make the shot. I land way short because I didn't want to spook the bonefish. Well, a bonefish actually did spook. I was like, oh, there it went. All the bonefish they didn't spook hard, but they moved off and the permit stayed. But the one disappeared and the other one turned and cut out over this flat. And I'm talking, he's in maybe 18 inches of water, pillow white sand, no grass. I lay a cast well in front of him and strip. And I actually watched that fish eat that fly at maybe 45 feet. It was a closed cast. I was down low. I literally watched the fish eat the crab. I strip set and I watched the fish the head just kind of jolted. I was like, uh-oh. And there he goes. He was out of there. And I'm using a 7 weight. It's not, I mean, it's a good sized fish and I get it in and there's nobody there to take my picture. It's just me on the flats. And
so it didn't happen.
I have a picture
No,
I have a picture of the fish. You just don't, as long as you can tell that's my hand, you're okay. So I have a picture of the fish with me tailing it and I let it go. I was like, I cannot believe that just happened.
Yeah.
And so there's some neat things like that where when you go to places, I think the part that is really cool is when you're doing stuff like that and the unexpected happens. I mean, and I've caught some really cool fish over the years, whether it be in Alaska or wherever else that, you didn't expect to find the fish where you found it. And so, I mean, stuff like that where you make, and sometimes it's just the cast to the fish. I mean, I think one of the very next permit I caught, cause we don't get down there all the time, but I went down there and I saw 2 of them actually cruising and they were booking it. And so I literally start like chugging through the flat and it's about a 75, 80 foot shot. And the wind was just piling into me. So I had to throw a back cast at them.
Okay.
And I launched about a 75-foot back cast and led that front fish by about 3 feet. And he turned on the fly and ate it immediately. And I was just like, oh man. And I was happy that I even got the cast out there and then he ate. And I was just, that sort of stuff. I mean, like sometimes it's the fish, sometimes it's the presentation.
Yeah.
Like it may not always be just the fish. Sometimes it's all the situation that surrounds it, but it's been really fun getting to go to some of those places and get to fish places that you ordinarily wouldn't. I fished a little bit in the Dominican Republic and stuff like that. Not much, but it's just one of those things of like getting to check some of those boxes and finding out that there's some places I'd really like to go back to if I ever get the chance. So it's been a lot of fun.
So you were 3-0 on your first 2 permit. You can brag if you want to.
No, I goose egged a few times in there.
Okay.
On my first one, it was 1-1.
1-0, yeah.
I've caught one under the lights. That's
really,
yeah. There was a phenomenon that happened. There's this place, a little key out there. There's a dock, and I know a couple of people have done it, but there was a phenomenon where these like a big school of permit, like 30, 40, 50, sometimes more, would come up under those lights at night, and you could swim a crab through them and occasionally catch one blind casting.
Really?
And so my second permit and my third permit were both on that trip, but I caught one blind casting the night before, and the other one bombing a 75-footer off my weak side. Yeah. So, but yeah, and then I chased one that same trip, and it was a big one too, which was really annoying. He was on the flat, sickle up, tail up, flat calm, the absolute worst because they can hear and see, and and there's a little bit of coral mixed in the grass, so you're crunching. And so anyway, I'm making the shot. I fished for that fish and chased him around that flat for 45 minutes. Never spooked him. Never got an eat.
Really?
He just eventually just went away. And I was like, well, okay, that's cool. But yeah, that one I goose egged on hard. So, no, I'm not 3 for 3. I've thrown at a number of them and goose egged hard. The first one was the claim to fame. Anything else, I went through several.
It still sounds cool to me. Have you caught a big speckled trout on fly yet?
I've not caught anything what I would consider truly large. I've caught some stuff that, would have, been over 20, but nothing that was like, hog.
I mean, I feel like you don't really get the option to because you're, working here so much.
If I were to admit how seldom I get to the Texas coast, it would grieve me and you.
Yeah.
I used to go all the time as a kid. So I've caught some pretty big, I've seen some stuff on the coast that's crazy. I had a buddy. We were fishing the Mansfield jetties one time. Then my uncle, my dad, my grandpa, we were all down there. I think it was a birthday trip for me. Actually, we went down there and it was in October. It was just the perfect time to be down there. Mm-hmm. We parked the boat and we're just chucking artificials and stuff. I had a fly rod in the boat, caught a couple of really good trout doing it. But there were just all these 2-foot long trout just churning mullet right in the breakwater. we had about an 8-foot, 9-foot swell coming in from the Gulf, crashing into the breakwater, and it was stunning the mullet because they were packed in there so hard.
Wow.
And we were seeing, fish get stunned and piled up in that corner. And these fish, like they were just, you look down and it was just trout everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was just every time you threw in there, you were either getting, if you were fishing live bait, something was getting stolen. If you were throwing an artificial, you were getting bumped. If you were throwing a fly, something was taken. It was cool. Like we caught a ton of fish in there. It was really, really neat. But one of the guys that was on that trip is one of my uncle's friends. And I've known him since we moved here. He throws it. He actually is like, oh man. And he just goes over and grabs a mullet head. I think it was just a head of a mullet, chucks it out there. And he's like, I'm going to see if anything eats this. And something grabs it. And his little spinning rod that he was using just blisters. And he runs down the jetty and he fights his fish for, 20, 30 minutes. I was like, what has he got on? I was like, it's got to be a big redfish or something. And I see him get it up to the rocks. He looks over, reels up tight, points the rod at the fish, breaks off, and then walks back. And I was like, what on earth? And he's like, well, I don't have a gaff. I can't get down there to get it. And he goes, that's about a 25-pound yellowfin.
What?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yellowfin tuna. Yeah. Yeah. He's like, crazy. He's like, would have never guessed. But I mean, my grandpa talked to people that jumped billfish on those jetties back in the day.
Yeah. You know what's cool? I actually just got a text from Brian Little. Someone was posting about a permit they caught in Texas.
Yeah. In fact, the biologists, a lot of times when they do coastal fisheries and stuff like that, when they go out and do any sort of like gill netting or anything like that, there's a lot of times they'll get juvenile, like 16-inch permit. And it happens a lot more regularly than I think it even makes press.
Yeah, I know. And I had that conversation with Eric Glass, and he mentioned that he had helped with TPWD with like the sifting nets, and that they were finding bonefish in spots where he would say, hey, that I would never expect bonefish to be. I mean, you'd think they'd be, up in the East Cut and stuff in the sand, but not even close. And it was one of those things where it's like, you really do wonder like how probable it is, because there's always like the what if, but it's like, but what actually if?
Well, I mean, that's the other side of it. It's like, if you have to look at, changes and things like that. So everybody's like, global warming's a big topic. I'm like, well, if you like bonefish, snook, and tarpon,
that's what I said. That's what I
was
said.
Like, dude, they're coming this way. I'm like, we're gonna have a bonefish fishery in like 30 years. So no, it's funny because like I've always said, I'm like, well, there's a positive side. There's a sunny side to all of it. But I think the thing for me, I've talked to people even when I was way back when working at the warehouse and stuff. Guys that come in from the coast, and they're like, I swear I saw a school of bonefish in Padre. I'm like, really? And they're like, I fished for redfish my whole life. And I've fished for bonefish my whole life. I know what these look like. And then they come in the shop. I've had people come in the shop say the same thing. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, and it's not many. I mean, they're like, yeah, there was like half dozen to 8 tails, but it's like, it's that silvery long sickle tail. And like, I couldn't get close enough for a shot. And I was like, oh my gosh. But I mean, it makes you wonder is it really? Is it not?
It's going to happen at one point.
Oh yeah.
It's just who's going to be lucky.
It's going to go down one of these days.
We already got the mahi on the flats thanks to Eric. Like,
no, it's going to go down someday. But I mean, I think it's funny that, they're not that much further south.
Right?
I mean,
when we're on the same line of the equator, like, make it make sense.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree.
We all want it. It's all good. If I could sell bonefish flies for Texas in Texas, I'm down. Absolutely.
I remember when after I had that conversation with Eric Glass, I started doing research on like how to genetically modify fish and like if it'd be possible to create a bonefish redfish hybrid. But there's like, obviously that was just a fever dream, but like it was, it is possible.
Don't go too far down that rabbit hole. That's a dangerous rabbit hole.
Well, yeah. So we're at the hour 47, and I think we're probably going to get close to the 2 by the time we finish. I have one more question, and then we'll do the last 2. Now, obviously, you're the third person to see the book in its full completed form. I'd like to know what you actually think about it.
Is it going to have a cover?
It will have a cover.
Okay, you said full completed, so
well, obviously, yes.
I'm just messing with you. So, no, it's awesome. I mean, it's I think especially just the photography, the fact it's a really good ode to the Texas coast. I mean, it was really pretty to see, a lot of the names and faces that you grew up knowing and that are still just major players down there. It captured it pretty darn well. It was beautiful.
I'm glad you think that. Yeah, it's always a little nerve wracking showing people the final product because like. I seldom mentioned it at all. I actually try to keep it a secret up until like 3 episodes ago. And now it's like, well, I really want to know what people think, but I've seen the book so many times that I'm not going to lie. I kind of hate it, but I love it. but I kind of hate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's anything you work on. That's anything anybody works on. They're like, you look at it long enough, you're like, I know what I'd change about that. I'm like, well, then change it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Well, so okay, I'm glad you said that. Now, the last two questions I have are looking back at your career, and it's quite a fantastic career considering that you just took a leap of faith, which is, ballsy to say the least, and made it to something where you've been able to create a communal family and be proud of it and have people, excel through the industry because of what you've done. Is there any regrets that you have or things that you wish you did differently throughout your career that you look back on, at least with, hoping, or not hoping, but maybe you could shine some light on them for people who might be taking the same path?
Man, I think anything that would really, everybody's got a regret or two in terms of like, maybe I wouldn't have ordered this or wouldn't have done that, or maybe I wouldn't have launched this at that time or whatever. And I don't really, that's just business. I don't really wrap myself up in that too much. It's kind of those things you just learn as you go. And especially being so young when I did it, I don't really have all that many regrets that I would say, like, if I had anything I wish I could change, I wish I had would have gone to school for web design. Honestly, I feel like that's the skill set that lacks a lot here. It's just like, I wish I had the ability to do, online stores, web design. I can do a lot of the photography and media and things of that sort. But if I were to go do anything and then want to do this over again, I would have probably gone to school for that and then come in here on that end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm probably a pretty terrible business owner and manager, but I really like fly fishing and I like people a lot. And so, that's the side of like, from an entrepreneurship, it's like, I had some vision of community and I love entrenching myself in the education. I can educate people and do all that. I love that side because you're enriching people's lives by, even the way you do so. Don't, again, kind of the Al Christ thing, don't teach down, just teach what they need to know. And then also, my way is not the only way. I'll be the first to tell you that. We just had this style conversation. It's the same thing. But regret wise, there were some skill sets that I would have greatly benefited from having coming into it. Now at 21, you didn't hardly even have enough time to build those.
Yeah.
But so I think in some ways I regret it in the fact that I didn't have it, but at the same time, this wouldn't have probably happened had I not jumped. Yeah. And so, some of that is, I kind of feel like I've always been behind the 8 ball just a little bit on some of that stuff throughout the business's growth. But at the same time, it's always seemed to work. And sometimes it's, and I truly believe it's just the grace of God and it's absolutely miraculous. And then I told somebody the other day, and somebody was like, yeah, the economy's so bad. Aren't you worried? And I'm like, my favorite one was COVID. When COVID happened, somebody came in, they're like, aren't you scared? And I'm like, of what? And they're like, well, COVID and your business, it's going to, I'm like, look, we have been through drought. We have been through flood. We have been through recession. I'm like, I don't think a virus is going to take us out. Yeah. And I'm like, no offense. If it does, then we needed to be gone anyway. I'm like, God put it here. God will take it out. I'm like that. And if we close tomorrow, truly, honestly, I can look back at this and go, I have little, a little thing here and there I do different, but like any major regrets, I'm not sure. If anything, I'd say I probably should have just prayed more. Honestly, that's the part, because if it wasn't for, truly the grace of God and the community that surrounds this shop, it wouldn't be here. And so I am proud of what we as a staff and what, a community have built.
You should be.
But also kind of like you said, you look at the book enough and you're like, there is that side of like, sure, there's things I wish that were different. I don't know if I'd call them regrets. I do wish they were different. Yeah. Because to regret something means you could have changed it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so for me, I'm like, I'm not sure a whole lot of what took place. And if you were to ask, my store manager this question, that would probably be, Melody could tell you some regrets. But no, for me, like, I think having so many years in guiding coming into it. I've been a licensed guide for 18 years now. And in, 4 different states now. So, it's one of those things I've guided in different places and have a lot of skill set that came to that. So, and just even the travel and the experience, there's a lot that kind of came I won't say naturally, but kind of by happenstance.
Yeah.
And that I just found myself in situations and it really built something and became something later. If I look at it, I mean, it's providential, truly. I mean, it's just one of those things that I look at, I'm like, I'm so thankful for the experiences that I've had along the way, the people that I've met along the way, because if you don't have relationships, you have nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what this entire sport's about. It's not who can cast farther, who can catch a bigger fish. It's like, man, it's not even he who has the most feathers wins in fly tying, which I would try to compete. I could throw down in that category, but nonetheless, it's one of those things of like, for me, at the end of the day, family's all you have. And I'm finding that I have very few friends. I have a lot of family because, you know, if I have acquaintances, that might be the meet, but the meet and greet type thing. But when I find people that I'm running with, I'm like, you're not a friend anymore. You're family. Like, and I'd do anything for you. And that's one of those things that, you know, you start looking at, there's people like that in life that you have to have that sort of, you know, that sort of relationship to really weather storms. And if it weren't for my staff and my family, my wife, my kids, my mom, my dad, you know, so many people that have supported, you know, this store over the years, just even in their, you know, their love, their support, their prayers. I mean, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have given up a long time ago. And I mean, people don't understand, you know, what takes place from the standpoint of everybody sees the shop. They walk in and like you said, it's like, man, this is so pretty in here. And I'm like, you didn't see where it started. You didn't see, you know, I mean, when we left the second space, I remember what it was like turning the lights off in there for the last time to come over here and to literally go, God, only you could do this. And it was just like, and cry your eyes out a little bit. I mean, like,
Of course.
I mean, I've bled in here. I've cried in here. I've laughed in here. I've stressed out in here. I've done everything you can do in here. I mean, it's just like, goodness gracious. But the side of it, I think that's so special is, you know, when you have like an amazing day and you see your staff on point and you see the community so excited about getting to support a fly shop and come say hi. And we do barbecue lunches at anniversaries and stuff. And my dad cooks all that. And my dad ever wanted another career, barbecue would have been it, dude. I don't like eating brisket out anymore. It's just that good. But anyway, the whole deal is just like that community involvement, that family involvement is so important to me. And it's even important to, I mean, I was telling you on the phone earlier in one of our conversations, I mean, I've had single moms drop their kids off for fly tying night. And I'm like, I want that kid here. Like that. I mean, what an incredible thing. I just taught a homeschool co-op entomology last week and went to the creek and got there 30 minutes early, caught 3 fish, put them in an aerator, and then seined up a net full of bugs, put them out, put them on their trays. And Jeff, one of my employees here and a very dear friend, he came to watch. And it was so funny because I said, you didn't do this when you were a kid, did you? And he goes, no. I said, me neither. Yeah. I'm like, how cool is it that these kids are getting to see something that I think is awesome in this part of life, but they're getting to see it that early. And so, I mean, those sort of things, family is everything. And getting to show those kids a fish and go, this is what eats the bugs, and show them a cichlid, show them a sunfish, and then release them. And they get to see catch and release. They get to see the bugs. They get to see all of it. I'm like, not a lot of shops do that. And that's what I think makes our shop so special is we have a staff full of people that they give of themselves, and they're really wonderful people. But, you know, we get to run together in this, and it's been pretty amazing to see the family, you know, what has been built around community.
Yeah. Before I ask my last question, is there anything about the industry that you wish would change?
Oh, no. How many more hours do you want to be here? So, yes, in short. Melody and I talk about this a lot. I look at what happened, you know, 16 years ago when I started the fly shop. Yeah. You know, the fly fishing industry was super cool. Like, it was so new and exciting, and there was new product coming out all the time. And a lot of it was really innovative and just, you know, truly, like, in some cases, earth shattering. I mean, and now I just don't see much of that in the realm of like product development and stuff. The things that are like earth shattering, I don't see as much of it. Yeah. I see like, okay, cool, this shirt changed colors. You know, it's one of those things, like, that's not earth shattering. But, you know, the thing, it was smaller back then. And I think that was the thing that I really miss about it now, 16 years later, is that the fly fishing industry as a whole, like if you ever go to like ICAST, when they were doing the ICAST shows and stuff like that, you walk in this epically large room, and like fly fishing is like 2 aisles, and the rest of it is like offshore and bass fishing. And and it's insane. And you walk around that stuff, And I tell people this all the time. They're like, oh, they thumb their nose at people throwing a bait caster. I'm like, that industry right there spends billions of dollars on one fish. I'm like, our industry, probably 2% or less of the flies sold in our sport are actually bass flies. I'm like, so careful. Their industry revolves around that fish. Your industry revolves around trout. Let's be really honest. I talked to a leading fly manufacturer the other day, and they said 90% of all of their flies sold are trout. The rest is divided between salt and, you basically salt and other fresh. So, I mean, that includes like jungle, flats, inshore, offshore, carp, bass, all divided between that. So you're looking at, there's probably almost 10 categories within that. So you're looking like 1%, 2%, maybe if you're lucky, of all flies sold are actually a warm water bass fly. And so you start thinking about how little of our industry actually revolves around the warm water component, which is like what most of our shop revolves around. We have to adapt a lot of product. And that's one of the reasons that I started getting my flies to Umpqua. I was like, we need these patterns
flies,
here. And so it's really cool from that end to be able to, take them and see them in the bins. And now I don't have to tie them all the time or have Mason tie them all the time. Shout out to Mason. He tied my flies. He's my youngest hire. I think I hired him at whenever it was legal to do so. I don't remember how young. It was
on paper legal.
No, it was legal, but there was sweatshop labor prior to that. So there was definitely tying flies.
Favors.
Yeah, he has a little he shed in the backyard that he was tying flies in. So it was like, please and thank you. Here's some store credit. That's that sort of stuff. But anyway, no, Mason's awesome. But I'm like, if I could pay you to mow my yard, I can pay you to tie my flies. You're fine. You're just not an employee. But anyway, all that being said, the thing that was really cool about it is the industry was smaller and I felt like a lot more innovative 16 years ago. I feel like now there's been a little bit of a standstill, like
complacency or something.
I don't know if it's as much complacency as it is. I mean, the industry, I think there's a lot more brands in it.
Yeah.
So the brand envelope is a lot wider. I hate to mention this because I don't want to ostracize anybody, but there's a lot more of this like YouTube, hey, let me show you how to fly fish. And I'm like, you've never fly fished before.
Yeah.
And so the information
oversaturated.
It's just available, which on the one hand is really great, but used to like writing a book, like you didn't say something unless you had something to actually say.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I'm going to do this to get followers and this is going to be my side job. And I'm like, it's probably not going to work out for you that way.
Motives changed.
But yeah, everything it got really, really all about an individual and less about the education. It's like, I want to build my channel and I want to be this person and I want to be a celebrity and I want to be that. And it became less about, I want to teach and I want to invest and I want to steward and I want to be, conservation minded or anything like that. It was really more about building, an empire versus building anglers.
Yeah. Or being part of a community.
Right. I mean, or just seeing yourself as one small part of a really big thing. And fly fishing so small in and of itself. But I think it's really funny because you walk, like I said, you walk into ICAST, it's like 2 rows and that's it. I mean, and that's every brand, it's every brand in the sport was there just about. And you're just like, whoa, we're not as big as we think we are. But when we're in a fly shop or, you're in these fly fishing circles, it's all we think about.
Absolutely.
But then, coming from a tournament bass background, because I used to do that, confessions. But yeah, I used to have a very, very glittery red bass boat and run it very fast and catch a lot of bass. And I'm still decent with a bait caster. So just to let you know. But the thing that was funny about that is that is so much more of an industry and so much more science goes into how fish see. I mean, fly fishing, what do? We catch a bass on a river and we're like, oh, they're eating these. I'm like, go put that same guy on a lake. He can't bass fish.
Yeah.
Because you're having to use sinking lines. You're having to think about pattern fishing. Where are they going to be at the spring, summer, fall, winter? What happens when frontal elements hit? They've only thought about it in terms of rivers. But I like thinking about rivers in terms of lakes because I can do both. I've grown up on both. I mean, I fished the Cibolo ever since I was little outside of San Antonio. And so, for me growing up on both and then tournament fishing and learning the pattern fishing, I mean, those are things that people like Rick Clunn and stuff like that, they pioneered that stuff. And I mean, tournament bass fishing hung the moon there.
Yeah.
In the fly fishing industry, I would love to see more thought put into how we fish for certain things. Not just, here's a bass fly, it's going to work.
Like more ingenuity.
Yeah, especially on the tying side. I mean, okay, if you were going to give me one bait right now. You're like, hey, you have to go bass fish today. It's raining outside. It's kind of nasty. We're, right on the verge of a front coming through. Dude, I just want like a wacky rigged Cinco. That's all I want. Just give me that. Find a fly that looks like that. There isn't one.
Or acts like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you can look like it, but it won't act like that. And so the thing is like they did all the science. They know this works. They're catching more fish than we are. So at which point, like, imitate it. I mean, we're really big in matching the forage, but there still is that reactionary element to fly fishing where things, it's a predator. It reacts to certain motions and movements, and it's not there. And so when I start bass fishing on lakes on fly, the way that I used to bass fish out of tournaments, I do much better. And I mean, Melody and I were actually at a rep meeting. It was funny. Eric Kramer, I love you for this. We were at a meeting and I was on Lake Bastrop, and I took Eric Kramer out my bass boat when I had it and everything like that. Because when I first opened the store, I still had it. And so we went out and fished for striper under the lights on Lake Travis one night on fly, and it was awesome. But we were on, he had his bass boat with him. We normally go fish after. He's like, dude, I can't fish. He's like, I got another meeting that wound up getting scheduled. He's like, but here, and he chucks me the keys. And he's like, you know what to do. I was like, all right, thanks. We back the boat in and we get out there, and I told Melody, I was like, I haven't driven one of these in a long time. You better hold on because I'm going to go fast. I was like, I missed the smell of boat exhaust anyway, but slam the hammer down. We get to the spot that I knew on Lake Bastrop. We get over there and the bass were schooling, and we rocked it with fly rods because we were throwing little bitty tiny shad patterns that are 1.5 inches long. A bait caster would have struggled. Yeah. And I mean, there's times that it shines on, lake environments, but then the sun comes up, schoolies go down, and fishing gets tough. You have to dig the sinking lines out, and you have to think, and you have to start using electronics and going, okay, our grass tops are at 12 feet. I need my fly to tick the grass top and then come back up just like a crankbait would or something like that. You can do that with a hair bug. You take a diving hair bug and you send it on a fast sinking line, and it drags what would normally be considered in fly fishing a topwater fly. You drag it all the way down, it ticks the grass tops, and you swim it back up to the boat and has a parabolic arc just like a crankbait. We caught fish. And so that's one of those things but that a lot of people don't think about it like that. But that's the things that, like, if we stop thumbing our nose at the other end of the industry and start learning from that, I think we would see a lot more ingenuity and development within our industry, at least in the warm water categories. Yeah. We've hung the moon on trout. We can't, we've got that figured out. In shallow water for redfish, there's even maybe some things that could be learned there. For sure. I mean, because, you look at the tournament side of it, and tournaments, like, it's a big game. And I mean, there's multiple views on that sort of stuff. But anytime you mix an industry with that sort of stuff, and there's a drive to compete for money, a lot of development comes out because of the sponsorships. And so that's where, in sponsorship, it's like, what are we going to do? We sponsor our own film tours. That's about as far as sponsorship goes. So those are things within the industry. I would like to see a little bit more, invention, ingenuity, new product development, and stuff that's not just, kind of remaking a wheel. Yeah. To really kind of push ourselves and say, what's the next level? What's coming up around the corner? SA did that with the Amplitude series of lines. That's probably the biggest breakthrough I've seen in the industry in the last several years, where they had something that they've added to lines. It's basically impregnated into the line an additive that migrates out as the line ages so that the outer coating stays fresh and slick. That's insane. To actually have a mobile component to a static product. Yeah. Those are things that I'd like to see more of. And then to see people really just fall in love with it, and just, I want to see their eyes sparkle. And, and I don't want it just to be, kind of a bro culture. I mean, it's one of those things. Yeah. We're seeing a lot more of, like, just because you have a Howler Brothers shirt doesn't mean you fly fish. It's kind of one of those things. I'd love to see more of people that really entrench themselves in the sport, and they eat, sleep, breathe, study, and just got to have it. And it's not that those people, like, I'm glad they fly fish. It's not that at all. It's just, there's so much more out there for them. Yeah, I don't disagree. And I'm glad you took the time to actually break down what you thought and why you thought it. With that being said, the last question I have is always geared towards the younger generation. If you had one piece of advice to give the younger generation in regards to success in this industry, think the kids that come into your shop whenever their moms drop them off, what would it be? Never own a fly shop, work at one. I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. If I were to say anything, you can't fake passion. Yeah. You can't. And I mean, and another way of putting it is, lovers will always work harder than workers. You will do things for love you'll never do for money. I like that. And so at that point, if you look at if you're young in the sport and you're enamored with it, I see kids come in here all the time and their eyes are just sparkling when they talk about it.
Up.
And dude, that's what I want to see. I want to see that fire for it. I want to see that passion for it. If you've got that, there's no limit to what you can do. I mean, I opened a shop as a 21-year-old kid, dude. I mean, it's like one of those things and I had no idea what was going on, but I had worked in corporate retail just long enough to have an idea of how to merchandise and how the product flow worked and all that sort of stuff. I had guided for a number of years at that point, and there were a couple of reps that took a chance on it because, and every one of them you talked to said, you were passionate.
Yeah.
They're like, if you would have just been some guy doing it, probably wouldn't have done it. They're like, but you were passionate and you wanted it. And I knew you would I knew you would put your all into it. And that for the younger generation, love it with all your heart, love people. And I mean, and if you're going to do it in fly fishing, pray hard. Get that relationship with God that you need. But the whole thing about it is like, for me, if you love it, you'll go far in it, and you can't help yourself. And you want other people to experience what you have. And that's the driving force behind so much of it is love for God, love for people, love for the environment.
Wow. No, I mean, I think you summarized it perfectly. Now, one more thing is, are there any shout outs that people that you have in the industry that either you use as inspiration or peers that you kind of like go back and forth with in terms of like taking it to the next level?
Man, it's kind of funny. I have a lot, like I said, I have a lot of family.
I figured, yeah.
And then, so, I mean, like, obviously my actual family is who keeps me grounded here. I mean, and I would include very much Melody on that as well as my sister-in-law. But I mean, like, there's, you're looking at my staff and my family. So, Emily, my kids, Dave and Lydia, I mean, they, they're the reason, I do what I do, because I mean, you got to make a living too. But but I mean, Emily, she's called me on the carpet a number of times and she's just like, what are you doing? I'm like, that's a really good question. It's like, so I mean, there's always the voice of reason, and my folks have always been there for me. But I would say within the industry and just kind of professionals that I've leaned on, one of the biggest, I would say, I mean, he's not with us anymore, but Joe Robinson, he would have been one of them, because I asked him, the last presentation he ever did at a fly shop was actually here.
Really?
Yeah. And, but I asked him before he got to see the second location and the final, what I hope is the final location. I don't want to move again, but he got to see this really beautiful building and do his last presentation that he ever did in a fly shop here. But I asked him at my second location, which was small. It was a little 1,000 square foot. It was in an office building. You couldn't hold a 9-foot rod up in the deal. We had to merchandise them diagonally. But long and short, I just asked him, I said, if you were me, you know where I'm at. I'm young. I've got a young family. What would you do? And he goes, I would be you. I would be a creek shop. He goes, you might think about it. If that's what you specialize in, he goes, should you carry a 5-weight? Ask yourself that question. He's like, should you do it? And the thing that was really cool about it is I followed that advice and really dialed down on hill country of Texas and local water. And the thing is like, everybody here that goes to the coast, where are they fishing in between? I love the coast. Everybody else loves the coast. We love doing it, but they're going to fish in their backyard. And that's the thing, is like falling in love with your home water. Those were people that I really gleaned some information. And sometimes it was only a sentence or two. I mean, obviously his life in the sport was great. He came up with Dave Whitlock. I mean, a lot of people don't know that, but I mean, they're best friends. But the thing that was really crazy is a lot of the people that I gleaned from, it was a sentence or two, or it was even Bill, the next time I saw him was 18 years later, 17 years later. And I mean, and I literally thanked him. I was like, I want to thank you because I can do what I do now because you inspired me that long ago from just seeing you at that class. Sometime, and I think we don't think about this, but those chance encounters really do matter, where you could inspire one person that could, start a fly shop, or it could be somebody in the industry, or could educate or start an after school program, or you don't know. And so taking every single encounter fairly seriously is hard for a lot of us, but that's what I gleaned, is a lot of the things that impacted me were chance encounters. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's a really good way to put it. I mean, with that being said, I mean, we're 100% the longest episode now to date.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You knew that was coming.
No, but this has been an honor. I'm really glad that we've been able to do this. I know the planning took a while, but I'm glad we stuck to it. I'm glad that you're a part of the project now. With that being said, we've covered everything. I'm pretty much ready to get out of here.
Man, take care.
Cool.